The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins.
Chapter 20. Those in front had spread the news before us. We found the servants in a state of panic. As we passed my lady's door, it was thrown open violently from the inner side. My mistress came out among us, with Mr. Franklin following, and trying vainly to compose her, quite beside herself with the horror of the thing. "You are answerable for this," she cried out, threatening the sergeant wildly with her hand. "Gabriel, give that wretch his money and release me from the sight of him." The sergeant was the only one among us who was fit to cope with her, being the only one among us who was in possession of himself. "I am no more answerable for this distressing calamity, my lady, than you are," he said. "If in half an hour from this you still insist on my leaving the house, I will accept your ladyship's dismissal, but not your ladyship's money." It was spoken very respectfully, but very firmly at the same time, and it had its effect on my mistress as well as on me. She suffered Mr. Franklin to lead her back into the room. As the door closed on the two, the sergeant, looking about among the women servants in his observant way, noticed that while all the rest were merely frightened, Penelope was in tears. "When your father has changed his wet clothes," he said to her, "come and speak to us in your father's room." Before the half-hour was out, I had got my dry clothes on, and had lent Sergeant Cuff such change of dress as he required. Penelope came in to us to hear what the sergeant wanted with her. I don't think I ever felt what a good, dutiful daughter I had, so strongly as I felt it in that moment. I took her and sat her on my knee, and I prayed God to bless her. She hid her head on my bosom, and put her arms around my neck, and we waited a little while in silence. The poor dead girl must have been at the bottom of it, I think, with my daughter and with me. The sergeant went to the window, and stood there looking out. I thought it right to thank him for considering us both in this way, and I did. People in high life have all the luxuries to themselves, among others the luxury of indulging their feelings. People in low life have no such privilege. Necessity, which spares our betters, has no pity on us. We learn to put our feelings back into ourselves, and to jog on with our duties as patiently as may be. I don't complain of this, I only notice it. Penelope and I were ready for the sergeant as soon as the sergeant was ready on his side. Asked if she knew what had led her fellow servant to destroy herself, my daughter answered, as you will foresee, that it was for love of Mr. Franklin Blake. Asked next if she had mentioned this notion of hers to any other person, Penelope answered, "I have not mentioned it for Rosanna's sake." I felt it necessary to add a word to this. I said, "And for Mr. Franklin's sake, my dear, as well. If Rosanna has died for the love of him, it is not with his knowledge or by his fault. Let him leave the house to-day, if he does leave it, without the useless pain of knowing the truth." Sergeant Cuff said, "Quite right," and fell silent again, comparing Penelope's notion, as it seemed to me, with some other notion of his own, which he kept to himself. At the end of the half-hour, my mistress's bell rang. On my way to answer it, I met Mr. Franklin coming out of his aunt's sitting-room. He mentioned that her ladyship was ready to see Sergeant Cuff, in my presence as before, and he added that he himself wanted to say 2 words to the sergeant first. On our way back to my room, he stopped and looked at the railway timetable in the hall. "Are you really going to leave us, sir?" I asked. "Miss Rachel will surely come right again, if you only give her time." "She will come right again," answered Mr. Franklin, "when she hears that I have gone away, and that she will see me no more." I thought he spoke in resentment of my young lady's treatment of him, but it was not so. My mistress had noticed from the time when the police first came into the house that the bare mention of him was enough to set Miss Rachel's temper in a flame. He had been too fond of his cousin to like to confess this to himself until the truth had been forced on him when she drove off to her aunt's. His eyes, once opened in that cruel way of which you know, Mr. Franklin had taken his resolution, the one resolution which a man of any spirit could take, to leave the house. What he had to say to the sergeant was spoken in my presence. He described her ladyship as willing to acknowledge that she had spoken over hastily, and he asked if Sergeant Cuff would consent, in that case, to accept his fee, and to leave the matter of the diamond where the matter stood now. The sergeant answered, "No, sir. My fee is paid me for doing my duty. I decline to take it until my duty is done." "I don't understand you," says Mr. Franklin. "I'll explain myself, sir," says the sergeant. "When I came here, I undertook to throw the necessary light on the matter of the missing diamond. I am now ready and waiting to redeem my pledge. When I have stated the case to Lady Verinder, as the case now stands, and when I have told her plainly what course of action to take for the recovery of the Moonstone, the responsibility will be off my shoulders. Let her ladyship decide, after that, whether she does or does not allow me to go on. I shall then have done what I undertook to do, and I'll take my fee." In those words, Sergeant Cuff reminded us that, even in the detective police, a man may have a reputation to lose. The view that he took was so plainly the right one that there was no more to be said. As I rose to conduct him to my lady's room, he asked if Mr. Franklin wished to be present. Mr. Franklin answered, "Not unless Lady Verinder desires it." He added in a whisper to me as I was following the sergeant out, "I know what that man is going to say about Rachel, and I'm too fond of her to hear it and keep my temper. Leave me by myself." I left him, miserable enough, leaning on the sill of my window with his face hidden in his hands, and Penelope peeping through the door, longing to comfort him. In Mr. Franklin's place I should have called her in. When you are ill-used by one woman, there is great comfort in telling it to another, because, 9 times out of 10, the other always takes your side. Perhaps when my back was turned he did call her in. In that case, it's only doing my daughter justice to declare that she would stick at nothing in the way of comforting Mr. Franklin Blake. In the meantime, Sergeant Cuff and I proceeded to my lady's room. At the last conference we had held with her, we had found her not over-willing to lift her eyes from the book that she had on the table. On this occasion there was a change for the better. She met the sergeant's eye with an eye that was as steady as his own. The family spirit showed itself in every line of her face, and I knew that Sergeant Cuff would meet his match when a woman like my mistress was strung up to hear the worst that he could say to her. End of chapter 20.
The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins.
Chapter 21. The first words, when we had taken our seats, were spoken by my lady. "Sergeant Cuff," she said, "there was perhaps some excuse for the inconsiderate manner in which I spoke to you half an hour since. I have no wish, however, to claim that excuse. I say, with perfect sincerity, that I regret it if I wronged you." The grace of voice and manner with which she made him that atonement had its due effect on the sergeant. He requested permission to justify himself, putting his justification as an act of respect to my mistress. It was impossible, he said, that he could be in any way responsible for the calamity which had shocked us all, for this sufficient reason, that his success in bringing his inquiry to its proper end depended on his neither saying nor doing anything that could alarm Rosanna Spearman. He appealed to me to testify whether he had or had not carried that object out. I could and did bear witness that he had, and there, as I thought, the matter might have been judiciously left to come to an end. Sergeant Cuff, however, took it a step further, evidently, as you shall now judge, with the purpose of forcing the most painful of all possible explanations to take place between her ladyship and himself. "I have heard a motive assigned for the young woman's suicide," said the sergeant, "which may possibly be the right one. It is a motive quite unconnected with the case which I am conducting here. I am bound to add, however, that my own opinion points the other way. Some unbearable anxiety in connection with the missing diamond has, I believe, driven the poor creature to her own destruction. I don't pretend to know what that unbearable anxiety may have been, but I think, with your ladyship's permission, I can lay my hand on a person who is capable of deciding whether I am right or wrong." "Is the person now in the house?" my mistress asked, after waiting a little. "The person has left the house, my lady." That answer pointed as straight to Miss Rachel as straight could be. A silence dropped on us which I thought would never come to an end. Lord, how the wind howled and how the rain drove at the window, as I sat there, waiting for one or the other of them to speak again. "Be so good as to express yourself plainly," said my lady. "Do you refer to my daughter?" "I do," said Sergeant Cuff, in so many words. My mistress had her cheque-book on the table when we entered the room, no doubt to pay the sergeant his fee. She now put it back in the drawer. It went to my heart to see how her poor hand trembled, the hand that had loaded her old servant with benefits, the hand that, I pray God, may take mine when my time comes, and I leave my place for ever. "I had hoped," said my lady, very slowly and quietly, "to have recompensed your services, and to have parted with you without Miss Verander's name having been openly mentioned between us, as it has been mentioned now. My nephew has probably said something of this before you came into the room?" "Mr. Blake gave his message, my lady, and I gave Mr. Blake a reason. It is needless to tell me your reason. After what you have just said, you know, as well as I do, that you have gone too far to go back. I owe it to myself, and I owe it to my child, to insist on your remaining here, and to insist on your speaking out." The sergeant looked at his watch. "If there had been time, my lady," he answered, "I should have preferred writing my report instead of communicating it by word of mouth. But if this inquiry is to go on, time is of too much importance to be wasted in writing. I am ready to go into the matter at once. It is a very painful matter for me to speak of, and for you to hear." There my mistress stopped him once more. "I may possibly make it less painful to you, and to my good servant and friend here," she said, "if I set the example of speaking boldly on my side. You suspect Miss Verinder of deceiving us all by secreting the diamond for some purpose of her own. Is that true?" "Quite true, my lady." "Very well. Now, before you begin, I have to tell you, as Miss Verinder's mother, that she is absolutely incapable of doing what you suppose her to have done. Your knowledge of her character dates from a day or two since. My knowledge of her character dates from the beginning of her life. State your suspicion of her as strongly as you please, it is impossible that you can offend me by doing so. I am sure beforehand that, with all your experience, the circumstances have fatally misled you in this case. Mind, I am in possession of no private information. I am as absolutely shut out of my daughter's confidence as you are. My one reason for speaking positively is the reason you have heard already. I know my child." She turned to me and gave me her hand. I kissed it in silence. "You may go on," she said, facing the sergeant again as steadily as ever. Sergeant Cuff bowed. My mistress had produced but one effect on him. His hatchet face softened for a moment, as if he was sorry for her. As to shaking him in his own conviction, it was plain to see that she had not moved him by a single inch. He settled himself in his chair, and he began his vile attack on Miss Rachel's character in these words. "I must ask your ladyship," he said, "to look at this matter in the face, from my point of view as well as from yours. Will you please to suppose yourself coming down here in my place and with my experience? And will you allow me to mention very briefly what that experience has been?" My mistress signed to him that she would do this. The sergeant went on. "For the last 20 years," he said, "I have been largely employed in cases of family scandal, acting in the capacity of confidential man. The one result of my domestic practice, which has any bearing on the matter now in hand, is a result which I may state in 2 words. It is well within my experience that young ladies of rank and position do occasionally have private debts which they dare not acknowledge to their nearest relatives and friends. Sometimes the milliner and jeweller are at the bottom of it. Sometimes the money is wanted for purposes which I don't suspect in this case, and which I won't shock you by mentioning. Bear in mind what I have said, my lady. And now let us see how events in this house have forced me back on my own experience, whether I liked it or not." He considered with himself for a moment, and went on, with a horrid clearness that obliged you to understand him, with an abominable justice that favoured nobody. "My first information relating to the loss of the Moonstone," said the sergeant, "came to me from Superintendent Seagrave. He proved to my complete satisfaction that he was perfectly incapable of managing the case. The one thing he said which struck me as worth listening to was this, that Miss Verinder had declined to be questioned by him, and had spoken to him with a perfectly incomprehensible rudeness and contempt. I thought this curious, but I attributed it mainly to some clumsiness on the superintendent's part, which might have offended the young lady. After that I put it by in my mind, and applied myself single-handed to the case. It ended, as you are aware, in the discovery of the smear on the door, and in Mr. Franklin Blake's evidence satisfying me that this same smear and the loss of the diamond were pieces of the same puzzle. So far, if I suspected anything, I suspected that the Moonstone had been stolen, and that one of the servants might prove to be the thief. Very good. In this state of things, what happens? Miss Verinder suddenly comes out of her room and speaks to me. I observe 3 suspicious appearances in that young lady. She is still violently agitated, though more than 24 hours have passed since the diamond was lost. She treats me as she has already treated Superintendent Seagrave, and she is mortally offended with Mr. Franklin Blake. Very good again. Here, I say to myself, is a young lady who has lost a valuable jewel, a young lady also, as my own eyes and ears inform me, who is of an impetuous temperament. Under these circumstances, and with that character, what does she do? She betrays an incomprehensible resentment against Mr. Blake, Mr. Superintendent, and myself, otherwise the very 3 people who have all, in their different ways, been trying to help her to recover her lost jewel. Having brought my inquiry to that point, then, my lady, and not till then, I begin to look back in my own mind for my own experience. My own experience explains Miss Verinder's otherwise incomprehensible conduct. It associates her with those other young ladies that I know of. It tells me she has debts which she daren't acknowledge, and that must be paid. And it sets me asking myself whether the loss of the diamond may not mean that the diamond must be secretly pledged to pay them. That is the conclusion which my experience draws from plain facts. What does your ladyship's experience say against it?" "What I have said already," answered my mistress. "The circumstances have misled you." I said nothing on my side. Robinson Crusoe, God knows how, had got into my muddled old head. If Sergeant Cuff had found himself at that moment transported to a desert island, without a man Friday to keep him company, or a ship to take him off, he would have found himself exactly where I wished him to be. Nota bene, I am an average good Christian, when you don't push my Christianity too far. And all the rest of you, which is a great comfort, are, in this respect, much the same as I am. Sergeant Cuff went on. "Right or wrong, my lady," he said, "having drawn my conclusion, the next thing to do was to put it to the test. I suggested to your ladyship the examination of all the wardrobes in the house. It was a means of finding the article of dress which had, in all probability, made the smear, and it was a means of putting my conclusions to the test. How did it turn out? Your ladyship consented, Mr. Blake consented, Mr. Applewhite consented. Miss Verinder alone stopped the whole proceeding by refusing point blank. That result satisfied me that my view was the right one. If your ladyship and Mr. Betteredge persist in not agreeing with me, you must be blind to what has happened here before you this very day. In your hearing, I told the young lady that her leaving the house, as things were then, would put an obstacle in the way of my recovering her jewel. You saw yourselves that she drove off in the face of that statement. You saw yourself that, so far from forgiving Mr. Blake for having done more than all the rest of you to put the clue into my hands, she publicly insulted Mr. Blake on the steps of her mother's house. What do these things mean? If Miss Verinder is not privy to the suppression of the diamond, what do these things mean? This time he looked my way. It was downright frightful to hear him piling up proof after proof against Miss Rachel, and to know, while one was longing to defend her, that there was no disputing the truth of what he said. I am, thank God, constitutionally superior to reason. This enabled me to hold firm to my lady's view, which was my view also. This roused my spirit, and made me put a bold face on it before Sergeant Cuff. Profit, good friends, I beseech you, by my example. It will save you from many troubles of the vexing sort. Cultivate a superiority to reason, and see how you pare the claws of all the sensible people when they try to scratch you for your own good. Finding that I made no remark, and that my mistress made no remark, Sergeant Cuff proceeded. Lord, how it did enrage me to notice that he was not in the least put out by our silence. There is the case, my lady, as it stands against Miss Verinder alone, he said. The next thing is to put the case as it stands against Miss Verinder and the deceased Rosanna Spearman taken together. We will go back a moment, if you please, to your daughter's refusal to let her wardrobe be examined. My mind being made up, after that circumstance, I had two questions to consider next. First, as to the right method of conducting my inquiry. Second, as to whether Miss Verinder had an accomplice among the female servants in the house. After carefully thinking it over, I determined to conduct the query in what we should call at our office a highly irregular manner. For this reason, I had a family scandal to deal with, which it was my business to keep within the family limits. The less noise made, and the fewer strangers employed to help me, the better. As to the usual course of taking people in custody on suspicion and going before the magistrate and all the rest of it, nothing of the sort was to be thought of when your ladyship's daughter was, as I believed, at the bottom of the whole business. In this case, I felt that a person of Mr. Betteredge's character and position in the house, knowing the servants as he did, and having the honour of the family at heart, which would be safer to take as an assistant than any other person whom I could lay my hand on. I should have tried Mr. Blake as well, but for one obstacle in the way. He saw the drift of my proceedings at a very early date, and with his interest in Miss Verinder, any mutual understanding was impossible between him and me. I trouble your ladyship with these particulars to show you that I have kept the family secret within the family circle. I am the only outsider who knows it, and my professional existence depends on holding my tongue. Here I felt that my professional existence depended on not holding my tongue. To be held up before my mistress in my old age as a sort of deputy policeman was once again more than my Christianity was strong enough to bear. "I beg to inform your ladyship," I said, "that I never, to my knowledge, helped this abominable detective business in any way, from first to last, and I summon Sergeant Cuff to contradict me if he dares." Having given vent in those words, I felt greatly relieved. Her ladyship honoured me by a little friendly pat on the shoulder. I looked with righteous indignation at the sergeant to see what he thought of such a testimony as that. The sergeant looked back like a lamb, and seemed to like me better than ever. My lady informed him that he might continue his statement. "I understand," she said, "that you have honestly done your best in what you believe to be my interest. I am ready to hear what you have to say next." "What I have to say next," answered the sergeant, "relates to Rosanna Spearman. I recognise the young woman, as your ladyship may remember, when she brought the washing book into this room. Up to that time I was inclined to doubt whether Miss Verinder had trusted her secret to anyone. When I saw Rosanna, I altered my mind. I suspected her at once of being privy to the suppression of the diamond. The poor creature has met her death by a dreadful end, and I don't want your ladyship to think, now that she's gone, that I was unduly hard on her. If this had been a common case of thieving, I should have given Rosanna the benefit of the doubt, just as freely as I should have given it to any of the other servants in the house. Our experience of the reformatory woman is that, when tried in service, and when kindly and judiciously treated, they prove themselves in the majority of cases to be honestly penitent and honestly worthy of the pains taken with them. But this was not a common case of thieving. It was a case, in my mind, of a deeply planned fraud, with the owner of the diamond at the bottom of it. Holding this view, the first consideration which naturally presented itself to me in connection with Rosanna was this: would Miss Verinder be satisfied, begging your ladyship's pardon, with leading us all to think that the Moonstone was merely lost? Or would she go a step further and delude us into believing that the Moonstone was stolen? In the latter event there was Rosanna Spearman, with the character of a thief, ready to her hand, the person of all others to lead your ladyship off, and to lead me off, on a false scent. Was it possible, I asked myself, that he could put his case against Miss Rachel and Rosanna in a more horrid point of view than this? It was possible, as you shall now see. "I had another reason for suspecting the deceased woman," he said, "which appears to me to have been stronger still. Who would be the very person to help Miss Verinder in raising money privately on the diamond? Rosanna Spearman. No young lady in Miss Verinder's position could manage such a risky matter as that by herself. A go-between she must have, and who so fit, again, as Rosanna Spearman? Your ladyship's deceased housemaid was at the top of her profession when she was a thief. She had relations, to my certain knowledge, with one of the few men in London, in the money-lending line, who would advance a large sum on such a notable jewel as the Moonstone, without asking awkward questions or insisting on awkward conditions. Bear this in mind, my lady, and Now let me show you how my suspicions have been justified by Rosanna's own acts, and by the plain inferences to be drawn on them." He thereupon passed the whole of Rosanna's proceedings under review. "You are already well acquainted with those proceedings as I am, and you will understand how unanswerably this part of his report fixed the guilt of being concerned in the disappearance of the Moonstone on the memory of the poor dead girl. Even my mistress was daunted by what he said now. She made him no answer when he had done. It didn't seem to matter to the sergeant whether he was answered or not. On he went, devil take him, just as steady as ever. "Having stated the whole case as I understand it," he said, "I have only to tell your ladyship now what I propose to do next. I see two ways of bringing this inquiry successfully to an end. One of those ways I look upon as a certainty. The other, I admit, is a bold experiment, and nothing more. Your ladyship shall decide. Shall we take the certainty first?" My mistress made him a sign to take his own way and choose for himself. "Thank you," said the sergeant. "We'll begin with the certainty, as your ladyship is so good as to leave it to me. Whether Miss Verinder remains at Fritzinghall, or whether she returns here, I propose in either case to keep a careful watch on all her proceedings, on all the people she sees, on the rides and walks she may take, and on the letters that she may write or receive." "What next?" asked my mistress. "I shall next," answered the sergeant, "request your ladyship's leave to introduce into the house, as a servant in the place of Rosanna Spearman, a woman accustomed to private inquiries of this sort, for whose discretion I can answer." "What next?" repeated my mistress. "Next," proceeded the sergeant, "and last, I propose to send one of my brother officers to make an arrangement with that money-lender in London, whom I mentioned just now as formerly acquainted with Rosanna Spearman, and whose name and address, your ladyship may rely on it, have been communicated by Rosanna to Miss Verinder. I don't deny that the course of action that I am now suggesting will cost money and consume time, but the result is certain. We run a line round the Moonstone, and draw that line closer and closer till we find it in Miss Verinder's possession, supposing she decides to keep it. If her debts press, and she decides on sending it away, then we have our man ready, and we meet the Moonstone on its arrival in London." To hear her own daughter made the subject of such a proposal as this stung my mistress into speaking angrily for the first time. "Consider your proposal declined in every particular," she said, "and go on to your other way of bringing this inquiry to an end." "My other way," said the sergeant, going on as easy as ever, "is to try that bold experiment to which I have alluded. I think I have formed a pretty correct estimate of Miss Verinder's temperament. She is quite capable, according to my belief, of committing a daring fraud, but she is too hot and impetuous in temper, and too little accustomed to deceit as a habit, to act the hypocrite in small things, and to restrain herself under all provocations. Her feelings in this case have repeatedly got beyond her control, and at the very time when it was plainly in her interest to conceal them. It is on this peculiarity in her character that I now propose to act, and want to give her a great shock suddenly, under circumstances that will touch her to the quick. In plain English, I want to tell Miss Verinder, without a word of warning, of Rosanna's death, on the chance that her own better feelings will hurry her into making a clean breast of it. Does your ladyship accept that alternative?" My mistress astonished me beyond all measure of expression. She answered him on the instant, "Yes, I do." "The pony chaise is ready," said the sergeant. "I wish your ladyship good morning." My lady held up her hand, and stopped him at the door. "My daughter's better feelings shall be appealed to, as you propose," she said, but I claim the right as her mother of putting her to the test myself. You will remain here, if you please, and I will go to Fretzinghall." For once in his life the great Cuff stood speechless with amazement, like an ordinary man. My mistress rang the bell and ordered her waterproof things. It was still pouring with rain, and the close carriage had gone, as you know, with Miss Rachel to Fretzinghall. I tried to dissuade her ladyship from facing the severity of the weather. Quite useless. I asked leave to go with her and hold the umbrella. She wouldn't hear of it. The pony chaise came round, with the groom in charge. "You may rely on two things," she said to Sergeant Cuff in the call. "I will try the experiment on Miss Verinder as boldly as you could try it yourself, and I will inform you of the result, either personally or by letter, before the last train leaves for London tonight." With that she stepped into the chaise, and, taking the reins herself, drove off to Fretzinghall. End of chapter 21.
The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins.
Chapter 22. My mistress having left us, I had leisure to think of Sergeant Cuff. I found him sitting in a snug corner of the hall, consulting his memorandum book and curling up viciously at the corners of the lips. "Making notes of the case?" I asked. "No," said the sergeant, "looking to see what my next professional engagement is." "Oh-ho," I said, "you think it's all over then here?" "I think," answered Sergeant Cuff, "that Lady Verinder is one of the cleverest women in England. I also think a rose much better worth looking at than a diamond. Where is the gardener, Mr. Betteridge?" There was no getting a word more out of him on the subject of the Moonstone. He had lost all interest in his own inquiry, and he would persist in looking for the gardener. An hour afterwards I heard them at high words in the conservatory, with the dog rose once more at the bottom of the dispute. In the meantime it was my business to find out whether Mr. Franklin persisted in his resolution to leave us by the afternoon train. After having been informed of the conference in my lady's room, and of how it had ended, he immediately decided on waiting to hear the news from Fretzinghall. This very natural alteration in his plans, which with ordinary people would have led to nothing in particular, proved in Mr. Franklin's case to have one objectionable result. It left him unsettled, with a legacy of idle time on his hands, and in so doing it let out all the foreign sides of his character one on top of another like rats out of a bag. Now as an Italian Englishman, now as a German Englishman, and now as a French Englishman, he drifted in and out of all the sitting-rooms in the house, with nothing to talk of but Miss Rachel's treatment of him, and with nobody to address himself to but me. I found him, for example, in the library, sitting under the map of modern Italy, and quite unaware of any other method of meeting his troubles, except the method of talking about them. "I have several worthy aspirations, Betteridge, but what am I to do with them now? I am full of dormant good qualities. If Rachel would only have helped me to bring them out." He was so eloquent in drawing the picture of his own neglected merits, and so pathetic in lamenting over it when it was done, that I felt quite at my wits' end how to console him, when it suddenly occurred to me that here was a case for the wholesome application of a bit of Robinson Crusoe. I hobbled out to my own room, and hobbled back with that immortal book. Nobody in the library. The map of modern Italy stared at me, and I stared at the map of modern Italy. I tried the drawing-room. There was his handkerchief on the floor, to prove that he had drifted in, and there was the empty room to prove that he had drifted out again. I tried the dining-room, and discovered Samuel with a biscuit and a glass of sherry, silently investigating the empty air. A minute since, Mr. Franklin had rung furiously for a little light refreshment. On its production in a violent hurry by Samuel, Mr. Franklin had vanished before the bell downstairs had quite done ringing with the pull he had given to it. I tried the morning-room, and found him at last. There he was at the window, drawing hieroglyphics with his finger in the damp on the glass. "Your sherry is waiting for you, sir," I said to him. I might as well have addressed myself to one of the four walls in the room. He was down in the bottomless deep of his own meditations, past all pulling up. "How do you explain Rachel's conduct, Betteridge?" was the only answer I received. Not being ready with the needful reply, I produced Robinson Crusoe, in which I am firmly persuaded some explanation might have been found if we had only searched long enough for it. Mr. Franklin shut up Robinson Crusoe and floundered into his German-English gibberish on the spot. "Why not look into it?" he said, as if I had personally objected to looking into it. "Why the devil lose your patience, Betteridge, when patience is all that's wanted to arrive at the truth? Don't interrupt me. Rachel's conduct is perfectly intelligible, if you will only do her the common justice to take the objective view first, and the subjective view next, and the objective-subjective view to wind up with. What do we know? We know that the loss of the Moonstone on Thursday morning last threw her into a state of nervous excitement, from which she was not recovered yet. Do you mean to deny the objective view so far? Very well, then. Don't interrupt me. Now, being in a state of nervous excitement, how are we to expect that she should behave as she would otherwise have behaved to any of the people about her? Arguing in this way from within outwards, what do we reach? We reach the subjective view. I defy you to controvert the subjective view. Very well, then. What follows? Good heavens, the objective-subjective explanation follows, of course. Rachel, properly speaking, is not Rachel, but somebody else. Do I mind being cruelly treated by somebody else? You are unreasonable enough, Betteridge, but you can hardly accuse me of that. How does it end? It ends, in spite of your confounded English narrowness and prejudice, in me being perfectly happy and comfortable. Where's the sherry? My head was by this time in such a condition that I was not quite sure whether it was my own head or Mr. Franklin's. In this deplorable state I contrived to do what I take to have been three objective things. I got Mr. Franklin his sherry, I retired to my own room, and I solaced myself with the most composing pipe of tobacco I ever remember to have smoked in my life. Don't suppose, however, that I was quit of Mr. Franklin on such easy terms as these. Drifting again out of the morning-room into the hall, he found his way to the offices next, smelt my pipe, and was instantly reminded that he had been simple enough to give up smoking for Miss Rachel's sake. In the twinkling of an eye he burst in on me with his cigar-case, and came out strong on the one everlasting subject in his neat, witty, unbelieving French way. "Give me a light, Betteridge. Is it conceivable that a man can have smoked as long as I have, without discovering that there is a complete system for the treatment of women at the bottom of his cigar-case? Follow me carefully, and I will prove it in 2 words. You choose a cigar. You try it, and it disappoints you. What do you do upon that? You throw it away and try another. Now observe the application. You choose a woman, you try her, and she breaks your heart. Fool, take a lesson from your cigar-case. Throw her away and try another." I shook my head at that. Wonderfully clever, I dare say, but my own experience was dead against it. "In the time of the late Mrs. Betteridge," I said, "I felt pretty often inclined to try your philosophy, Mr. Franklin, but the law insists on your smoking your cigar, sir, once you have chosen it." I pointed that observation with a wink. Mr. Franklin burst out laughing, and we were as merry as crickets until the next new side of his character turned up in due course. So things went on with my young master and me, and so, while the sergeant and the gardener were wrangling over the roses, we two spent the interval before the news came back from Fritzinghall. The pony-chaise returned a good half-hour before I had ventured to expect it. My lady had decided to remain, for the present, at her sister's house. The groom brought 2 letters from his mistress, one addressed to Mr. Franklin, and the other to me. Mr. Franklin's letter I sent to him in the library, into which refuge his driftings had now taken him for the 2nd time. My own letter I read in my own room. A cheque, which dropped out when I opened it, informed me, before I had mastered the contents, that Sergeant Cuff's dismissal from the inquiry after the Moonstone was now a settled thing. I sent to the conservatory to say that I wished to speak to the sergeant directly. He appeared with his mind full of the gardener and the dog Rose, declaring that the equal of Mr. Begbie for obstinacy never had existed yet, and never would exist again. I requested him to dismiss such wretched trifling as this from our conversation, and to give his best attention to a really serious matter. Upon that he exerted himself sufficiently to notice the letter in my hand. "Ah," he said in a weary way, "you have heard from her ladyship. Have I anything to do with it, Mr. Betteridge?" "You shall judge for yourself, Sergeant." I thereupon read him the letter, with my best emphasis and discretion, in the following words. "My good Gabriel, I request that you will inform Sergeant Cuff that I have performed the promise I made to him, with this result. So far as Rosanna Spearman is concerned, Miss Verinder solemnly declares that she has never spoken a word in private to Rosanna since that unhappy woman first entered my house. They never met, even accidentally, on the night when the diamond was lost, and no communication of any sort took place between them, from the Thursday morning when the alarm was first raised in the house, to this present Saturday afternoon when Miss Verinder left us. After telling my daughter suddenly, and in so many words, of Rosanna Spearman's suicide, this is what has come of it." Having reached that point, I looked up, and asked Sergeant Cuff what he thought of the letter so far. "I should only offend you if I expressed my opinion," answered the sergeant. "Go on, Mr. Betteridge," he said with the most exasperating resignation. "Go on." When I remembered that this man had had the audacity to complain of our gardener's obstinacy, my tongue itched to go on in other words than my mistress's. At this time, however, my Christianity held firm. I proceeded steadily with her ladyship's letter. Having appealed to Miss Verinder in the manner which the officer thought most desirable, I spoke to her next in the manner which I myself thought most likely to impress her. On 2 different occasions before my daughter left my roof, I privately warned her that she was exposing herself to suspicion of the most unendurable and most degrading kind. I have now told her, in the plainest terms, that my apprehensions have been realized. Her answer to this, on her own solemn affirmation, is as plain as words can be. In the first place, she owes no money, privately, to any living creature. In the second place, the diamond is not now, and never has been, in her possession, since she put it into the cabinet on Wednesday night. The confidence which my daughter has placed in me goes no further than this. She maintains an obstinate silence when I ask her if she can explain the disappearance of the diamond. She refuses with tears when I appeal to her to speak out for my sake. The day will come when you will know why I am careless about being suspected, and why I am silent even with you. I have done much to make my mother pity me, nothing to make my mother blush for me. Those are my daughter's own words. After what has passed between the officer and me, I think, stranger as he is, that he should be made acquainted with what Miss Verinder has said as well as you. Read my letter to him, and then place in his hands the cheque which I enclose. In resigning all further claim on his services, I have only to say that I am convinced of his honesty and his intelligence, but I am more firmly persuaded than ever that the circumstances in this case have fatally misled him. There the letter ended. Before presenting the cheque, I asked Sergeant Cuff if he had any remark to make. "It's no part of my duty, Mr. Betteridge," he answered, "to make remarks on a case when I have done with it." I tossed the cheque across the table to him. "Do you believe in that part of her ladyship's letter?" I said indignantly. The sergeant looked at the cheque, and lifted up his dismal eyebrows in acknowledgment of her ladyship's liberality. "This is such a generous estimate of the value of my time," he said, "that I feel bound to make some return for it. I'll bear in mind the amount of this cheque, Mr. Betteridge, when the occasion comes round for remembering it." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Her ladyship has smoothed matters over for the present very cleverly," said the sergeant. "But this family scandal is of the sort that bursts up again when you least expect it. We shall have more detective business on our hands, sir, before the Moonstone is many months older." If those words meant anything, and if the manner in which he spoke them meant anything, it came to this. My mistress's letter had proved, to his mind, that Miss Rachel was hardened enough to resist the strongest appeal that could be addressed to her, and that she had deceived her own mother, good God, under what circumstances, by a series of abominable lies. How other people in my place might have replied to the sergeant, I don't know. I answered what he said in these plain terms. "Sergeant Cuff, I consider your last observation an insult to my lady and her daughter." "Mr. Betteredge, consider it as a warning to yourself, and you'll be nearer the mark." Hot and angry as I was, the infernal confidence with which he gave me that answer closed my lips. I walked to the window to compose myself. The rain had given over, and who should I see in the courtyard but Mr. Begbie, the gardener, waiting outside to continue the dog-rose controversy with Sergeant Cuff. "My compliments to the sergeant," said Mr. Begbie, the moment he set eyes on me. "If he's minded to walk to the station, I'm agreeable to go with him." "What?" cries the sergeant behind me. "Are you not convinced yet?" "The devil a bit I'm convinced," answered Mr. Begbie. "Then I'll walk to the station," says the sergeant. "Then I'll meet you at the gate," says Mr. Begbie. I was angry enough, as you know, but how was any man's anger to hold out against such an interruption as this? Sergeant Cuff noticed the change in me, and encouraged it by a word in season. "Come, come," he said, "why not treat my view of the case as her ladyship treats it? Why not say, the circumstances have fatally misled me?" To take anything as her ladyship took it was a privilege worth enjoying, even with the disadvantage of it having been offered to me by Sergeant Cuff. I cooled slowly down to my customary level. I regarded any other opinion of Miss Rachel than my lady's opinion or mine with a lofty contempt. The only thing I could not do was to keep off the subject of the Moonstone. My own good sense ought to have warned me, I know, to let the matter rest. But there, the virtues which distinguish the present generation were not invented in my time. Sergeant Cuff had hit me on the raw, and, though I did look down upon him with contempt, the tender place still stings for all that. The end of it was that I perversely led him back to the subject of her ladyship's letter. "I am quite satisfied myself," I said, "but never mind that. Go on as if I was still open to conviction. You think Miss Rachel is not to be believed on her word, and you say we shall hear of the Moonstone again. Back your opinion, Sergeant," I concluded in an airy way. "Back your opinion." Instead of taking offence, Sergeant Cuff seized my hand and shook it till my fingers ached again. "I declare to heaven," says this strange officer solemnly, "I would take to domestic service tomorrow, Mr. Betteredge, if I had a chance of being employed along with you. To say you are as transparent as a child, sir, is to pay the children a compliment which 9 out of 10 of them don't deserve. There, there, we won't begin to dispute again. You shall have it out of me on easier terms than that. I won't say a word more about her ladyship, or about Miss Verinder. I'll only turn prophet for once in a way, and for your sake. I have warned you already that you haven't done with the Moonstone yet. Very well. Now I'll tell you, at parting, of 3 things which will happen in the future, and which, I believe, will force themselves on your attention, whether you like it or not." "Go on," I said, quite unabashed, and just as airy as ever. "First," says the sergeant, "you will hear something from the Yollands, when the postman delivers Rosanna's letter at Cobb's Hole on Monday next." If he had thrown a bucket of cold water over me, I doubt if I could have felt it much more unpleasantly than I felt those words. Miss Rachel's assertion of her innocence had left Rosanna's conduct, the making of the new nightgown, the hiding of the smeared nightgown, and all the rest of it, entirely without explanation, and this had never occurred to me till Sergeant Cuff forced it on my mind all in a moment. "In the second place," proceeded the sergeant, "you will hear of the 3 Indians again. You will hear of them in the neighbourhood, if Miss Rachel remains in the neighbourhood. You will hear of them in London, if Miss Rachel goes to London." Having lost all interest in the 3 jugglers, and having thoroughly convinced myself of my young lady's innocence, I took this second prophecy easily enough. "So much for 2 of the 3 things that are going to happen," I said. "Now for the third." "The third and last," said Sergeant Cuff, "you will, sooner or later, hear something of that money-lender in London, whom I have twice taken the liberty of mentioning already. Give me your pocket-book, and I'll make a note for you of his name and address, so that there may be no mistake about it if the thing really happens." He wrote accordingly on a blank leaf, "Mr. Septimus Luca, Middlesex Place, Lambeth, London." "There," he said, pointing to the address, "are the last words on the subject of the Moonstone, which I shall trouble you with for the present. Time will show whether I am right or wrong. In the meanwhile, sir, I carry away with me a sincere personal liking for you, which I think does honour to both of us. If we don't meet again before my professional retirement takes place, I hope you will come and see me in a little house near London which I have got my eye on. There will be grass walks, Mr. Betteridge, I promise you, in my garden. And as for the white moss rose—" "The de'il a bit you get the white moss rose to grow, unless you bud him on the dog rose first," cried a voice at the window. We both turned round. There was the everlasting Mr. Begbie, too eager for the controversy to wait any longer at the gate. The sergeant wrung my hand and darted out into the courtyard, hotter still on his side. "Ask him about the white moss rose when he comes back, and see if I've left him a leg to stand on," cried the great Cuff, hailing me through the window in his turn. "Gentlemen both," I answered, moderating them again as I had moderated them once already. "In the matter of the moss rose there is a great deal to be said on both sides." I might as well, as the Irish say, have whistled jigs to a milestone. Away they went together, fighting the battle of the roses, without asking or giving quarter on either side. The last I saw of them, Mr. Begbie was shaking his obstinate head, and Sergeant Cuff had got him by the arm like a prisoner in charge. Ah, well, well. I own I couldn't help liking the sergeant, though I hated him all the time. Explain that state of mind if you can. You will soon be rid now of me and my contradictions. When I have reported Mr. Franklin's departure, the history of Saturday's events will be finished at last. And when I have next described certain strange things that happened in the course of the new week, I shall have done my part of the story, and shall hand over the pen to the person who is appointed to follow my lead. If you are as tired of reading this narrative as I am of writing it, Lord, how shall we enjoy ourselves on both sides a few pages further on. End of chapter 22.
The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins.
Chapter 23. I had kept the pony chaise ready, in case Mr. Franklin persisted in leaving us by the train that night. The appearance of the luggage, followed downstairs by Mr. Franklin himself, informed me, plainly enough, that he had held firm to a resolution for once in his life. "So you have really made up your mind, sir?" I said as we met in the hall. "Why not wait a day or two longer, and give Miss Rachel another chance?" The foreign varnish appeared to have all worn off Mr. Franklin, now that the time had come for saying good-bye. Instead of replying to me in words, he put the letter which her ladyship had addressed to him into my hand. The greater part of it said over again what had been said already in the other communication received by me. But there was a bit about Miss Rachel, added at the end, which will account for the steadiness of Mr. Franklin's determination, if it accounts for nothing else. You will wonder, I dare say, her ladyship wrote, at my allowing my own daughter to keep me perfectly in the dark. A diamond worth £20,000 has been lost, and I am left to infer that the mystery of its disappearance is no mystery to Rachel, and that some incomprehensible obligation of silence has been laid on her by some person or persons utterly unknown to me, with some object in view which I cannot even guess. Is it conceivable that I should allow myself to be trifled with in this way? It is quite conceivable in Rachel's present state. She is in a condition of nervous agitation pitiable to see. I dare not approach the subject of the Moonstone again until time has done something to quiet her. To help this end, I have not hesitated to dismiss the police officer. The mystery which baffles us baffles him too. This is not a matter in which any stranger can help us. He adds to what I have to suffer, and he maddens Rachel if she only hears his name. My plans for the future are as well settled as they can be. My present idea is to take Rachel to London, partly to relieve her mind by a complete change, partly to try what may be done by consulting the best medical advice. Can I ask you to meet us in town? My dear Franklin, you, in your way, must imitate my patience and wait as I do for a fitter time. The valuable assistance which you have rendered to the inquiry after the lost jewel is still an unpardoned offence in the present dreadful state of Rachel's mind. Moving blindfold in this matter, you have added to the burden of anxiety which she has had to bear, by innocently threatening her secret with discovery through your exertions. It is impossible for me to excuse the perversity that holds you responsible for consequences which neither you nor I could imagine or foresee. She is not to be reasoned with, she can only be pitied. I am grieved to have to say it, but for the present you and Rachel are better apart. The only advice I can offer you is to give her time. I handed the letter back, sincerely sorry for Mr. Franklin, for I knew how fond he was of my young lady, and I saw that her mother's account of her had cut him to the heart. You know the proverb, sir, was all I said to him. When things are at the worst, they're sure to mend. Things can't be much worse, Mr. Franklin, than they are now. Mr. Franklin folded up his aunt's letter, without appearing to be much comforted by the remark that I had ventured on addressing to him. When I came here from London with that horrible diamond, he said, I don't believe there was a happier household in England than this. Look at the household now. Scattered, disunited, the very air of the place poisoned with mystery and suspicion. Do you remember that morning at the Shivering Sand, when we talked about my Uncle Herncastle and his birthday gift? The Moonstone has served the Colonel's vengeance, Betteridge, by means which the Colonel himself never dreamt of. With that he shook me by the hand, and went out to the pony-chaise. I followed him down the steps. It was very miserable to see him leaving the old place, where he had spent the happiest years of his life, in this way. Penelope, sadly upset by all that had happened in the house, came round crying to bid him good-bye. Mr. Franklin kissed her. I waved my hand, as much as to say, "You're heartily welcome, sir." Some of the other female servants appeared, peeping after him round the corner. He was one of those men whom all the women like. At the last moment I stopped the pony-chaise and begged as a favour that he would let us hear from him by letter. He didn't seem to heed what I said. He was looking round from one thing to another, taking a sort of farewell of the old house and grounds. "Tell us where you're going to, sir," I said, holding on by the chaise, and trying to get at his future plans that way. Mr. Franklin pulled his hat down suddenly over his eyes. "Going?" says he, echoing the word after me. "I'm going to the devil." The pony started at the word as if it had felt a Christian horror of it. "God bless you, sir, go where you may," was all I had time to say before he was out of sight and hearing. A sweet and pleasant gentleman. With all his faults and follies, a sweet and pleasant gentleman. He left a sad gap behind him when he left my lady's house. It was dull and dreary enough when the long summer evening closed in on that Saturday night. I kept my spirits from sinking by sticking fast to my pipe and my Robinson Crusoe. The women, excepting Penelope, beguiled the time by talking of Rosanna's suicide. They were all obstinately of the opinion that the poor girl had stolen the Moonstone, and that she had destroyed herself in terror of being found out. My daughter, of course, privately held fast to what she had said all along. Her notion of the motive, which was really at the bottom of the suicide, failed, oddly enough, just where my young lady's assertion of her innocence failed also. It left Rosanna's secret journey to Fritzinghall, and Rosanna's proceedings in the matter of the nightgown, entirely unaccounted for. There was no use in pointing this out to Penelope. The objection made about as much impression on her as a shower of rain on a waterproof coat. The truth is, my daughter inherits my superiority to reason, and in respect to that accomplishment has got a long way ahead of her own father. On the next day, Sunday, the close carriage which had been kept at Mr. Abblewhite's came back to us empty. The coachman brought a message for me and written instructions for my lady's own maid and for Penelope. The message informed me that my mistress had determined to take Miss Rachel to her house in London on the Monday. The written instructions informed the two maids of the clothing that was wanted, and directed them to meet their mistresses in town at the given hour. Most of the other servants were to follow. My lady had found Miss Rachel so unwilling to return to the house, after what had happened in it, that she had decided on going to London direct from Fritzinghall. I was to remain in the country until further orders, to look after things indoors and out. The servants left with me were to be put on board wages. Being reminded by all this of what Mr. Franklin had said about our being a scattered and disunited household, my mind was led naturally to Mr. Franklin himself. The more I thought of him, the more uneasy I felt about his future proceedings. It ended in my writing by the Sunday's post to his father's valet, Mr. Jeffco, whom I had known in former years, to beg he would let me know what Mr. Franklin had settled to do on arriving in London. The Sunday evening was, if possible, duller even than the Saturday evening. We ended the day of rest, as hundreds of thousands of people end it regularly once a week in these islands. That is to say, we all anticipated bedtime, and fell asleep in our chairs. How the Monday affected the rest of the household, I don't know. The Monday gave me a good shake-up. The first of Sergeant Cuff's prophecies of what was to happen, namely that I should hear from the Yollands, came true on that day. I had seen Penelope and my lady's maid off in the railway with the luggage for London, and was pottering about the grounds, when I heard my name called. Turning round, I found myself face to face with the fisherman's daughter, limping Lucy. Bating her lame foot and her leanness, the last a horrid drawback in a woman, in my opinion, the girl had some pleasing qualities in the eye of a man. A dark, keen, clever face, and a nice, clear voice, and a beautiful brown head of hair counted among her merits. A crutch appeared in the list of her misfortunes, and a temper reckoned high in the sum total of her defects. "Well, my dear," I said, "what do you want with me?" "Where's the man you call Franklin Blake?" says the girl, fixing me with a fierce look as she rested herself on her crutch. "That's not a respectful way to speak of any gentleman," I answered. "If you wish to inquire for my lady's nephew, you will please mention him as Mr. Franklin Blake." She limped a step nearer to me, and looked as if she could have eaten me alive. "Mr. Franklin Blake," she repeated after me. "Murderer Franklin Blake would be a fitter name for him." My practice with the late Mrs. Betteridge came in handy here. Whenever a woman tries to put you out of temper, turn the tables and put her out of temper instead. They are generally prepared for every effort you can make in your defence, but that. One word does it as well as 100, and one word did it with limping Lucy. I looked her pleasantly in the face, and I said, "Pooh." The girl's temper flamed out directly. She poised herself on her sound foot, and she took her crutch and beat it furiously 3 times on the ground. "He's a murderer! He's a murderer! He's a murderer! He has been the death of Rosanna Spearman!" She screamed out that answer at the top of her voice. 1 or 2 of the people at work in the grounds near us looked up, saw it was Limping Lucy, knew what to expect from that quarter, and looked away again. "He has been the death of Rosanna Spearman?" I repeated. "What makes you say that, Lucy?" "What do you care? What does any man care? Oh, if she had only thought of the men as I think, she might have been living now." "She always thought kindly of me, poor soul," I said, "and to the best of my ability I have always tried to act kindly by her." I spoke these words in as comforting manner as I could. The truth is, I hadn't the heart to irritate the girl by another of my smart replies. I had only noticed her temper at first. I noticed her wretchedness now, and wretchedness is not uncommonly insolent, you'll find, in humble life. My answer melted Limping Lucy. She bent her head down and laid it on the top of her crutch. "I loved her," the girl said softly. "She had lived a miserable life, Mr. Betteridge. Vile people had ill-treated her and led her wrong, and it hadn't spoiled her sweet temper. She was an angel. She might have been happy with me. I had a plan for our going to London together, like sisters, and living by our needles. That man came here and spoilt it all. He bewitched her. Don't tell me he didn't mean it and didn't know it. He ought to have known it. He ought to have taken pity on her. I can't live without him, and, oh, Lucy, he never even looks at me. That's what she said. Cruel, 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 I said. No man is worth fretting for in that way. And she said, there are men worth dying for, Lucy, and he is one of them. I had saved up a little money. I had settled things with father and mother. I meant to take her away from the mortification she was suffering here. We should have had a little lodging in London and lived together, like sisters. She had a good education, sir, as you know, and she wrote a good hand. She was quick at her needle. I have a good education, and I write a good hand. I'm not as quick at my needle as she was, but I could have done. We might have got our living nicely. And what happens this morning? What happens this morning? Her letter comes and tells me that she has done with the burden of her life. Her letter comes and bids me good-bye forever. Where is he? Cries the girl, lifting her head from the crutch and flaming out again through her tears. Where's this gentleman that I mustn't speak of except with respect? Ha, Mr. Betteridge, the day is not far off when the poor will rise against the rich. I pray heaven they may begin with him. I pray heaven they may begin with him. Here was another of your average good Christians, and here was the usual breakdown, consequent of that same average Christianity being pushed too far. The parson himself, though I own this is saying a great deal, could hardly have lectured the girl in the state she was in now. All I ventured to do was to keep her to the point, in the hope of something turning up which might be worth hearing. "What do you want with Mr. Franklin Blake?" I asked. "I want to see him." "For anything particular?" "I have got a letter to give him." "From Rosanna Spearman?" "Yes." "Sent to you in your own letter?" "Yes." Was the darkness going to lift? Were all the discoveries that I was dying to make coming and offering themselves to me of their own accord? I was obliged to wait a moment. Sergeant Cuff had left his infection behind him. Certain signs and tokens, personal to myself, warned me that the detective fever was beginning to set in again. "You can't see Mr. Franklin," I said. "I must and will see him." "He went to London last night." Limping Lucy looked me hard in the face, and saw that I was speaking the truth. Without a word more, she turned about again instantly towards Cobb's Hole. "Stop," I said. "I expect news of Mr. Franklin Blake tomorrow. Give me your letter, and I'll send it on to him by the post." Limping Lucy steadied herself on her crutch, and looked back at me over her shoulder. I am to give it from my hands into his hands, she said, and I am to give it to him in no other way. Shall I write and tell him what you have said? Tell him I hate him, and you will tell him the truth. Yes, yes, but about the letter. If he wants the letter, he must come back here and get it from me. With those words she limped off on the way to Cobb's Hole. The detective fever burnt up all my dignity on the spot. I followed her and tried to make her talk. All in vain. It was my misfortune to be a man, and Limping Lucy enjoyed disappointing me. Later in the day I tried my luck with her mother. Good Mrs. Yolland could only cry and recommend a drop of comfort out of the Dutch bottle. I found the fisherman on the beach. He said it was a bad job, and went on mending his net. Neither father nor mother knew more than I knew. The only way left was to try the chance, which might come with the morning, of writing to Mr. Franklin Blake. I leave you to imagine how I watched for the postman on Tuesday morning. He brought me 2 letters. One from Penelope, which I had hardly the patience enough to read, announced that my lady and Miss Rachel were safely established in London. The other, from Mr. Jeffco, informed me that his master's son had left England already. On reaching the metropolis, Mr. Franklin had, it appeared, gone straight to his father's residence. He arrived at an awkward time. Mr. Blake the elder was up to his eyes in the business of the House of Commons, and was amusing himself at home that night with the favourite parliamentary plaything which they call a private bill. Mr. Jeffco himself showed Mr. Franklin into his father's study. "My dear Franklin, why do you surprise me in this way? Anything wrong?" "Yes, something wrong with Rachel. I am dreadfully distressed about it." "Grieved to hear it, but I can't listen to you now." "When can you listen?" "My dear boy, I won't deceive you. I can listen at the end of the session, not a moment before. Good night." "Thank you, sir, and good night." Such was the conversation inside the study, as reported to me by Mr. Jeffco. The conversation outside the study was shorter still. "Jeffco, see what time the tidal train starts tomorrow morning." "At 6:40, Mr. Franklin." "Have me called at 5. "Going abroad, sir?" "Going, Jeffco, wherever the railway chooses to take me." "Shall I tell your father, sir?" "Yes, tell him at the end of the session." The next morning Mr. Franklin had started for foreign parts. To what particular place he was bound, nobody, himself included, could presume to guess. We might hear of him next in Europe, Asia, Africa, or America. The chances were as equally divided as possible, in Mr. Jeffco's opinion, among the 4 quarters of the globe. This news, by closing up all prospects of my bringing Limping Lucy and Mr. Franklin together, at once stopped any further progress of mine on the way to discovery. Penelope's belief that her fellow servant had destroyed herself through unrequited love for Mr. Franklin Blake was confirmed, and that was all. Whether the letter which Rosanna had left to be given to him after her death did or did not contain the confession which Mr. Franklin had suspected her of trying to make to him in her lifetime, it was impossible to say. It might only be a farewell word, telling nothing but the secret of her unhappy fancy for a person beyond her reach. Or it might own the whole truth about the strange proceedings in which Sergeant Cuff had detected her from the time when the Moonstone was lost to the time when she rushed to her own destruction at the Shivering Sand. A sealed letter it had been placed in Limping Lucy's hand, and a sealed letter it remained to me and to everyone about the girl, her own parents included. We all suspected her of having been in the dead woman's confidence. We all tried to make her speak. We all failed. Now one and now another of the servants, still holding to the belief that Rosanna had stolen the diamond and had hidden it, peered and poked about the rocks to which she had been traced, and peered and poked in vain. The tide ebbed and the tide flowed, the summer went on and the autumn came, and the quicksand which hid her body hid her secret too. The news of Mr. Franklin's departure from England on the Sunday morning and the news of my lady's arrival in London with Miss Rachel on the Monday afternoon had reached me, as you are aware, by the Tuesday's post. The Wednesday came and brought nothing. The Thursday produced a second budget of news from Penelope. My girl's letter informed me that some great London doctor had been consulted about her young lady, and had earned a guinea by remarking that she had better be amused. Flower shows, operas, balls, there was a whole round of gaieties in prospect, and Miss Rachel, to her mother's astonishment, eagerly took to it all. Mr. Godfrey had called, evidently as sweet as ever on his cousin, in spite of the reception he had met with when he had tried his luck on the occasion of the birthday. To Penelope's great regret, he had been most graciously received, and had added Miss Rachel's name to one of his lady's charities on the spot. My mistress was reported to be out of spirits, and to have held 2 long interviews with her lawyer. Certain speculations followed, referring to a poor relation of the family, one Miss Clack, whom I have mentioned in my account of the birthday dinner as sitting next to Mr. Godfrey and having a pretty taste in champagne. Penelope was astonished to find that Miss Clack had not called yet. She would surely not be long before she fastened herself on my lady as usual, and so forth, in the way that women have of girding at each other on and off paper. This would not have been worth mentioning, I admit, but for one reason. I hear that you are likely to be turned over to Miss Clack after parting with me. In that case, do me the favour of not believing a word she says, if she speaks of your humble servant. On Friday nothing happened, except that one of the dogs showed signs of a breaking out behind the ears. I gave him a dose of syrup of buckhorn, and put him on a diet of pot liquor and vegetables, until further orders. Excuse my mentioning this. It has slipped in somehow. Pass over it, please. I am fast coming to the end of my offences against your cultivated modern taste. Besides, the dog was a good creature, and deserved a good physicking, so he did indeed. Saturday, the last day of the week, is also the last day in my narrative. The morning's post brought me a surprise in the shape of a London newspaper. The handwriting in the direction puzzled me. I compared it with the money-lender's name and address as recorded in my pocket-book, and identified it at once as being the writing of Sergeant Cuff. Looking through the paper, eagerly enough, after this discovery, I found an ink mark drawn round one of the police reports. Here it is at your service. Read it as I read it, and you will set the right value on the sergeant's polite attention in sending me the news of the day. Lambeth. Shortly before the closing of the court, Mr. Septimus Luca, the well-known dealer in ancient gems, carvings, intagli, etc., etc., applied to the sitting magistrate for advice. The applicant stated that he had been annoyed at intervals throughout the day by the proceedings of some of those strolling Indians who infest the streets. The persons complained of were 3 in number. After having been sent away by the police, they had returned again and again, and had attempted to enter the house on pretence of asking for charity. Warned off in the front, they had been discovered again at the back of the premises. Besides the annoyance complained of, Mr. Luca expressed himself as under some apprehension that robbery might be contemplated. His collection contained many unique gems, both classical and oriental, of the highest value. He had, only the day before, been compelled to dismiss a workman in ivory from his employment, a native of India, as we understood, on suspicion of attempted theft, and he felt by no means sure that this man and the street jugglers of whom he complained might not be acting in concert. It might be their object to collect a crowd and create a disturbance in the street, and, in the confusion thus caused, to obtain access to the house. In reply to the magistrate, Mr. Luca admitted that he had no evidence to produce of any attempt at robbery being in contemplation. He could speak positively to the annoyance and interruption caused by the Indians, but not to anything else. The magistrate remarked that, if the annoyance were repeated, the applicant could summon the Indians to that court, where they might easily be dealt with under the Act. As to the valuables in Mr. Luca's possession, Mr. Luca himself must take best measures for their safe custody. he would do well, perhaps, to communicate with the police, and to adopt such additional precautions as their experience might suggest. The applicant thanked his worship and withdrew. One of the wise ancients is reported, I forget on what occasion, as having recommended his fellow creatures to look to the end. Looking to the end of these pages of mine, and wondering for some days past how I should manage to write it, I find my plain statement of facts coming to a conclusion most appropriately of its own self. We have gone on in this manner of the Moonstone, from one marvel to another, and here we end with the greatest marvel of all, namely the accomplishment of Sergeant Cuff's 3 predictions in less than a week from the time when he had made them. After hearing from the Yollands on the Monday, I had now heard of the Indians and heard of the moneylender in the news from London, Miss Rachel herself, remember, being also in London at the time. You see, I put things at their worst, even when they tell dead against my own view. If you desert me, and side with the sergeant on the evidence before you, if the only rational explanation you can see is that Miss Rachel and Mr. Luca must have got together, and that the Moonstone must now be in pledge in the moneylender's house, I own I can't blame you for arriving at that conclusion. In the dark, I have brought you thus far. In the dark, I am compelled to leave you, with my best respects. Why compelled, it may be asked? Why not take the persons who have gone along with me so far up into those regions of superior enlightenment in which I sit myself? In answer to this, I can only state that I am acting under orders, and that those orders have been given to me, as I understand, in the interests of truth. I am forbidden to tell more in this narrative than I knew myself at the time. Or, to put it plainer, I am to keep strictly within the limits of my own experience, and am not to inform you of what other persons told me, for the very sufficient reason that you are to have the information from those other persons themselves at first hand. In this matter of the Moonstone, the plan is not to present reports, but to produce witnesses. I picture to myself a member of the family reading these pages 50 years hence. Lord, what a compliment he will feel it, to be asked to take nothing on hearsay, and to be treated in all respects like a judge on the bench. At this place, then, we part, for the present at least, after long journeying together, with companionable feeling, I hope, on both sides. The devil's dance of the Indian diamond has threaded its way to London, and to London you must go after it, leaving me at the country house. Please to excuse the faults of this composition, my talking so much of myself, and being too familiar, I'm afraid, with you. I mean no harm, and I drink most respectfully, having just done dinner, to your health and prosperity, in a tankard of her ladyship's ale. May you find in these leaves of my writing what Robinson Crusoe found in his experience on the desert island, namely, something to comfort yourself from, and to set in the description of good and evil on the credit side of the account. Farewell. End of chapter 23. End of the first period.
The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Read by Kristine Bekere. Second period. The Discovery of the Truth. 1848 till 1849. The events related in several narratives. First narrative. Contributed by Miss Cluck, niece of the late Sir John Verinder. Chapter 1. I am indebted to my parents, both now in heaven, for having had habits of order and regularity instilled into me at a very early age. In that happy bygone time, I was taught to keep my hair tidy at all hours of the day and night, and to fold up every article of my clothing carefully, in the same order, on the same chair, in the same place, at the foot of the bed, before retiring to rest. An entry of the day's events in my little diary invariably preceded the folding up. The evening hymn, repeated in bed, invariably followed the folding up. and the sweet sleep of childhood invariably followed the evening hymn. In later life, alas, the hymn has been succeeded by sad and bitter meditations, and the sweet sleep has been but ill exchanged for the broken slumbers which haunt the uneasy pillow of care. On the other hand, I have continued to fold my clothes and to keep my little diary. The former habit links me to my happy childhood, before Papa was ruined. The latter habit, hitherto mainly useful in helping me to discipline the fallen nature which we all inherit from Adam, has unexpectedly proved important to my humble interests in quite another way. It has enabled poor me to serve the caprice of the wealthy member of the family into which my late uncle married. I am fortunate enough to be useful to Mr. Franklin Blake. I have been cut off from all news of my relatives by marriage for some time past. When we are isolated and poor, we are not infrequently forgotten. I am now living, for economy's sake, in a little town in Brittany, inhabited by a select circle of serious English friends, and possessed of the inestimable advantages of a Protestant clergyman and a cheap market. In this retirement, a Patmos amid the howling ocean of Popery that surrounds us, a letter from England has reached me at last. I find my insignificant existence suddenly remembered by Mr. Franklin Blake. My wealthy relative, would that I could add my spiritually wealthy relative, writes without even an attempt at disguising that he wants something of me. The whim has seized him to stir up the deplorable scandal of the Moonstone, and I am to help him by writing the account of what I myself witnessed while visiting at Aunt Verinder's house in London. Peculiarly remuneration is offered to me with the want of feeling peculiar to the rich. I am to reopen wounds that time has barely closed. I am to recall the most intensely painful remembrances, and this done I am to feel myself compensated by a new lacqueration in the shape of Mr. Blake's cheque. My nature is weak. It cost me a hard struggle before Christian humility conquered sinful pride, and self-denial accepted the cheque. Without my diary, I doubt, pray let me express it in the grossest terms, if I could have honestly earned my money. With my diary, the poor laborer who forgives Mr. Blake for insulting her is worthy of her hire. Nothing escaped me at the time I was visiting dear Aunt Verinder. Everything was entered, thanks to my early training, day by day as it happened, and everything down to the smallest particular shall be told here. My sacred regard for truth is, thank God, far above my respect for persons. It will be easy for Mr. Blake to suppress what may not prove to be sufficiently flattering in these pages to the person chiefly concerned in them. He has purchased my time, but not even his wealth can purchase my conscience too. Note, added by Franklin Blake. Miss Cluck may make her mind quite easy on this point. Nothing will be added, altered, or removed in her manuscript, or in any of the other manuscripts which pass through my hands. Whatever opinions any of the writers may express, whatever peculiarities of treatment may mark, and perhaps in a literary sense disfigure the narratives which I am now collecting, not a line will be tampered with anywhere, from first to last. As genuine documents they are sent to me, and as genuine documents I shall preserve them, endorsed by the attestations of witnesses who can speak to the facts. It only remains to be added that the person chiefly concerned in Mrs. Cluck's narrative is happy enough at the present moment not only to brave the smartest exercise of Miss Cluck's pen, but even to recognize its unquestionable value and as an instrument for the exhibition of Miss Cluck's character. End of the note. My diary informs me that I was accidentally passing Aunt Verinder's house in Montagu Square on Monday, 3rd of July, 1848, seeing the shutters opened and the blinds drawn up, I felt that it would be an act of polite attention to knock and make inquiries. The person who answered the door informed me that my aunt and her daughter (I really cannot call her my cousin) had arrived from the country a week since, and meditated making some stay in London. I sent up a message at once, declining to disturb them, and only begging to know whether I could be of any use. The person who answered the door took my message in insolent silence, and left me standing in the hall. She is the daughter of a heathen old man named Bekere, long, too long tolerated in my aunt's family. I sat down in the hall to wait for my answer, and, having always a few tracts in my bag, I selected one which proved to be quite providentially applicable to the person who answered the door. The hall was dirty, and the chair was hard, but the blessed consciousness of returning good for evil raised me quite above any trifling considerations of that kind. The tract was one of a series addressed to young women on the sinfulness of dress. In style it was devoutly familiar. Its title was "A Word with You on Your Cap Ribbons." "My lady is much obliged, and begs you will come and lunch tomorrow at 2." I passed over the manner in which she gave her message, and the dreadful boldness of her look. I thanked this young castaway, and I said, in a tone of Christian interest, "Will you favour me by accepting a tract?" She looked at the title. "Is it written by a man or a woman, miss? If it's written by a woman, I had rather not read it on that account. If it's written by a man, I beg to inform him that he knows nothing about it." She handed me back the tract, and opened the door. We must sow the good seed somehow. I waited till the door was shut on me, and slipped the tract into the letter box. When I had dropped another tract through the area railings, I felt relieved, in some small degree, of a heavy responsibility towards others. We had a meeting that evening of the Select Committee of the Mothers' Small Clothes Conversion Society. The object of this excellent charity is, as all serious people know, to rescue unredeemed fathers' trousers from the pawnbroker, and to prevent their resumption, on the part of the irreclaimable parent, by abridging them immediately to suit the proportions of the innocent son. I was a member at that time of the Select Committee, and I mention the society here because my precious and admirable friend, Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite, was associated with our work of moral and material usefulness. I had expected to see him in the boardroom on the Monday evening of which I am now writing, and had proposed to tell him, when we met, of dear Aunt Verinder's arrival in London. To my great disappointment he never appeared. On my expressing a feeling of surprise at his absence, my sisters of the committee all looked up together from their trousers (we had a great pressure of business that night), and asked in amazement if I had not heard the news. I acknowledged my ignorance, and was then told for the first time of an event which forms, so to speak, the starting point of this narrative. On the previous Friday, two gentlemen, occupying widely different positions in society, had been the victims of an outrage which had startled all London. One of the gentlemen was Mr. Septimus Luca, of Lambeth, the other Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite. Living in my present isolation, I have no means of introducing the newspaper account of the outrage into my narrative. I was also deprived at the time of the inestimable advantage of hearing the events related by the fervid eloquence of Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite. All I can do is to state the facts as they were stated on that Monday evening to me, proceeding on the plan which I have been taught from infancy to adopt in folding of my clothes. Everything shall be put neatly, and everything shall be put in its place. These lines are written by a poor weak woman, from a poor weak woman who will be cruel enough to expect more. The date, thanks to my dear parents, No dictionary that ever was written can be more particular that I am about dates, was Friday, June the 13th, 1848. Early on that memorable day, our gifted Mr. Godfrey happened to be cashing a check at a banking house in Lombard Street. The name of the firm is accidentally blotted in my diary, and my sacred regard for truth forbids me to hazard a guess in a matter of this kind. Fortunately, the name of the firm doesn't matter. What does matter is a circumstance that occurred when Mr. Godfrey had transacted his business. On gaining the door he encountered a gentleman, a perfect stranger to him, who was accidentally leaving the office exactly at the same time as himself. A momentary contest of politeness ensued between them as to who should be the first to pass through the door of the bank. The stranger insisted on making Mr. Godfrey precede him. Mr. Godfrey said a few civil words. They bowed and parted in the street. Thoughtless and superficial people may say, here is surely a very trumpery little incident related in an absurdly circumstantial manner. Oh, my young friends and fellow sinners, beware of presuming to exercise your poor carnal reason. Oh, be morally tidy. Let your face be as your stockings, and your stockings as your face, both ever spotless, and both ready to put on at a moment's notice. I beg 1,000 pardons. I have fallen insensibly into my Sunday school style, most inappropriate in such a record as this. Let me try to be worldly. Let me say that trifles in this case, as in many others, led to terrible results. Merely premising that the polite stranger was Mr. Luca of Lambeth, we will now follow Mr. Godfrey home to his residence at Kilburn. He found waiting for him in the hall a poorly clad but delicate and interesting-looking little boy. The boy handed him a letter, merely in mentioning that he had been entrusted with it by an old lady whom he did not know, and who had given him no instructions to wait for an answer. Such incidents as these were not uncommon in Mr. Godfrey's large experience as a promoter of public charities. He let the boy go, and opened the letter. The handwriting was entirely unfamiliar to him. It requested his attendance within an hour's time at a house in Northumberland Street, Strand, which he had never had occasion to enter before. The object sought was to obtain from the worthy manager certain details on the subject of a Mothers' Small Clothes Convention Society, and the information was wanted by an elderly lady who proposed adding largely to the resources of the charity, if her questions were met by satisfactory replies. She mentioned her name, and she added that the shortness of her stay in London prevented her from giving any longer notice to the eminent philanthropist whom she addressed. Ordinary people might have hesitated before setting aside their own engagements to suit the convenience of a stranger. The Christian hero never hesitates where good is to be done. Mr. Godfrey instantly turned back and proceeded to the house in Northumberland Street. A most respectable, though somewhat corpulent man answered the door, and, on hearing Mr. Godfrey's name, immediately conducted him into an empty apartment at the back, on the drawing-room floor. He noticed two unusual things on entering the room. One of them was a faint odor of musk and camphor. The other was an ancient Oriental manuscript, richly illuminated with Indian figures and devices, that lay open to inspection on a table. He was looking at the book, the position of which caused him to stand with his back turned towards the closed folding doors communicating with the front room, when, without the slightest previous noise to warn him, he felt himself suddenly seized round the neck from behind. He had just time to notice that the arm round his neck was naked and of a tawny brown color, before his eyes were bandaged, his mouth was gauged, and he was thrown helpless on the floor by, as he judged, two men. A third rifled his pockets, and if, as a lady, I may venture to use such an expression, searched him without ceremony, through and through to his skin. Here I should greatly enjoy saying a few cheering words on the devout confidence which could alone have sustained Mr. Godfrey in an emergency so terrible as this. Perhaps, however, the position and appearance of my admirable friend at the culminating period of the outrage, as above described, are hardly within the proper limits of female discussion. Let me pass over the next few moments, and return to Mr. Godfrey at the time when the odious search of his person had been completed. The outrage had been perpetrated throughout in dead silence. At the end of it some words were exchanged among the invisible wretches in a language which he did not understand, but in tones which were plainly expressive, to his cultivated ear, of disappointment and rage. He was suddenly lifted from the ground, placed in a chair, and bound there hand and foot. The next moment he felt the air flowing in from the open door, listened, and concluded that he was alone again in the room. An interval elapsed, and he heard a sound below like the rustling sound of a woman's dress. It advanced up the stairs and stopped. A female scream rent the atmosphere of guilt. A man's voice below exclaimed "Hullo!" A man's feet ascended the stairs. Mr. Godfrey felt Christian fingers unfastening his bandage and extracting his gag. He looked in amazement at two respectable strangers and faintly articulated, "What does it mean?" The two respectable strangers looked back and said, "Exactly the question we were going to ask you." The inevitable explanation followed. Now, let me be scrupulously particular. Sal volatile and water followed, to compose dear Mr. Godfrey's nerves. The explanation came next. It appeared from the statement of the landlord and landlady of the house, persons of good repute in the neighborhood, that their first and second floor apartments had been engaged on the previous day for a week certain by a most respectable looking gentleman, the same who has been already described as answering the door to Mr. Godfrey's knock. The gentleman had paid the week's rent and all the week's extras in advance, stating that the apartments were wanted for 3 Oriental noblemen, friends of his, who were visiting England for the first time. Early on the morning of the outrage, 2 of the Oriental strangers, accompanied by their respectable English friend, took possession of the apartments. The third was expected to join them shortly, and the luggage, reported as very bulky, was announced to follow when it had passed through the custom house, late in the afternoon. Not more than 10 minutes previous to Mr. Godfrey's visit, the third foreigner had arrived. Nothing out of the common had happened to the knowledge of the landlord and landlady downstairs, until within the last 5 minutes, when they had seen the 3 foreigners, accompanied by their respectable English friend, all leave the house together, walking quietly in the direction of the Strand. Remembering that a visitor had called, and not having seen the visitor also leave the house, the landlady had thought it rather strange that the gentleman should be left by himself upstairs. After a short discussion with her husband, she had considered it advisable to ascertain whether anything was wrong. The result had followed, as I have already attempted to describe it, and there the explanation of the landlord and the landlady came to an end. An investigation was next made in the room. Dear Mr. Godfrey's property was found scattered in all directions. When the articles were collected, however, nothing was missing. His watch, chain, purse, keys, pocket handkerchief, notebook, and all his loose papers had been closely examined, and had then been left unharmed to be resumed by the owner. In the same way, not the smallest morsel of property belonging to the proprietors of the house had been abstracted. The Oriental noblemen had removed their own illuminated manuscript, and had removed nothing else. What did it mean? Taking the worldly point of view, it appeared to mean that Mr. Godfrey had been the victim of some incomprehensible error committed by certain unknown men. A dark conspiracy was on foot in the midst of us, and our beloved and innocent friend had been entangled in its meshes. When the Christian hero of 100 charitable victories plunges into a pitfall that has been dug for him by mistake, oh, what a warning it is to the rest of us to be unceasingly on our guard! How soon may our own evil passions prove to be Oriental noblemen who pounce on us unawares! I could write pages of affectionate warning on this one theme, but, alas, I am not permitted to improve, I am condemned to narrate. My wealthy relatives check, henceforth, the incubus of my existence warns me that I have not done with this record of violence yet. We must leave Mr. Godfrey to recover in Northumberland Street and must follow the proceedings of Mr. Luca at a later period of the day. After leaving the bank, Mr. Luca had visited various parts of London on business errands. Returning to his own residence, he found a letter waiting for him, which was described as having been left a short time previously by a boy. In this case, as in Mr. Godfrey's case, the handwriting was strange, but the name mentioned was the name of one of Mr. Luca's customers. His correspondent announced, writing in the third person apparently by the hand of a deputy, that he had been unexpectedly summoned to London. He had just established himself in lodgings in Alfred Place, Tottenham Court Road, and he desired to see Mr. Luca immediately, on the subject of a purchase which he contemplated making. The gentleman was an enthusiastic collector of Oriental antiquities, and had been for many years a liberal patron of the establishment in Lambeth. Oh, when shall we wean ourselves from the worship of Mammon? Mr. Luca called a cab and drove off instantly to his liberal patron. Exactly what had happened to Mr. Godfrey in Northumberland Street now happened to Mr. Luca in Alfred Place. Once more the respectable man answered the door, and showed the visitor upstairs into the back drawing-room. There again lay the illuminated manuscript on a table. Mr. Luca's attention was absorbed, as Mr. Godfrey's attention had been absorbed, by this beautiful work of Indian art. He too was aroused from his studies by a tawny naked arm round his throat, by a bandage over his eyes, and by a gag in his mouth. He too was thrown prostrate and searched to the skin. A longer interval had then elapsed than had passed in the experience of Mr. Godfrey, but it had ended as before, in the persons of the house suspecting something wrong, and going upstairs to see what had happened. Precisely the same explanation which the landlord in Northumberland Street had given to Mr. Godfrey, the landlord in Alfred Place now gave to Mr. Luca. Both had been imposed on in the same way by the plausible address and well-filled purse of the respectable stranger, who introduced himself as acting for his foreign friends. The one point of difference between the two cases occurred when the scattered contents of Mr. Luca's pockets were being collected from the floor. His watch and purse were safe, but, less fortunate than Mr. Godfrey's, one of the loose papers that he carried about him had been taken away. The paper in question acknowledged the receipt of a valuable of great price, which Mr. Luca had that day left in the care of his bankers. This document would be unless for purposes of fraud, inasmuch as it provided that the valuable should only be given up on the personal application of the owner. As soon as he recovered himself, Mr. Luca hurried to the bank, on the chance that the thieves who had robbed him might ignorantly present themselves with the receipt. Nothing had been seen of them when he arrived at the establishment, and nothing was seen of them afterwards. The respectable English friend had, in the opinion of the bankers, looked the receipt over before they attempted to make use of it, and had given them the necessary warning in good time. Information of both outrages was communicated to the police, and the needful investigations were pursued, I believe with great energy. The authorities held that a robbery had been planned, on insufficient information received by the thieves. They had been plainly not sure whether Mr. Luca had, or had not, trusted the transmission of his precious gem to another person, and poor polite Mr. Godfrey had paid the penalty of having been seen accidentally speaking to him. Add to this that Mr. Godfrey's absence from our Monday evening meeting had been occasioned by a consultation of the authorities, at which he was requested to assist, and all the explanations required being now given, I may proceed with the simpler story of my own little personal experiences in Montagu Square. I was punctual to the luncheon hour on Tuesday. Reference to my diary shows this to have been a checkered day, much in it to be devoutly regretted, much in it to be devoutly thankful for. Dear Aunt Verinder received me with her usual grace and kindness, but I noticed after a little while that something was wrong. Certain anxious looks escaped my aunt, all of which took the direction of her daughter. I never see Rachel myself without wondering how it can be that so insignificant looking a person should be the child of such distinguished parents as Sir John and Lady Verinder. On this occasion, however, she not only disappointed, she really shocked me. There was an absence of all ladylike restraint in her language and manner most painful to see. She was possessed by some feverish excitement which made her distressingly loud when she laughed, and sinfully wasteful and capricious in what she ate and drank at lunch. I felt deeply for her poor mother, even before the true state of the case had been confidentially made known to me. Luncheon over, my aunt said, "Remember what the doctor told you, Rachel, about quieting yourself with a book after taking your meals." "I'll go into the library, mamma," she answered. "But if Godfrey calls, mind I am told of it. I am dying for more news of him after his adventure in Northumberland Street." She kissed her mother on the forehead and looked my way. "Good boy, Clark," she said carelessly. Her insolence roused no angry feeling in me. I only made a private memorandum to pray for her. When we were left by ourselves, my aunt told me the whole horrible story of the Indian diamond, which I am happy to know it is not necessary to repeat here. She did not conceal from me that she would have preferred keeping silence on the subject. But when her own servants all knew of the loss of the Moonstone, and when some of the circumstances had actually found their way into the newspapers, when strangers were speculating whether there was any connection between what had happened at Lady Verinder's country house and what had happened in Northumberland Street and Alfred Place, concealment was not to be thought of, and perfect frankness became a necessity as well as a virtue. Some persons hearing what I now heard would have been probably overwhelmed with astonishment. For my own part, knowing Rachel's spirit to have been essentially unregenerate from her childhood upwards, I was prepared for whatever my aunt would tell me on the subject of her daughter. It might have gone on from bad to worse till it ended in murder, and I should still have said to myself, the natural result. Oh dear, dear, the natural result! The one thing that did shock me was the course my aunt had taken under the circumstances. Here surely was a case for a clergyman, if ever there was one yet. Lady Verinder had thought it a case for a physician. All my poor aunt's early life had been passed in her father's godless household. The natural result again. Oh dear, dear, the natural result again. The doctors recommended plenty of exercise and amusement for Rachel, and strongly urged me to keep her mind as much as possible from dwelling on the past, said Lady Verinder. Oh, what heathen advice, I thought to myself, in this Christian country, what heathen advice. My aunt went on. I do my best to carry out my instructions, but this strange adventure of Godfrey's happens at a most unfortunate time. Rachel has been incessantly restless and excited since she first heard of it. She left me no peace till I had written and asked my nephew Applewhite to come here. She even feels an interest in the other person who was roughly used, Mr. Luker, or some such name, though the man is of course a total stranger to her. "Your knowledge of the world, dear aunt, is superior to mine," I suggested diffidently. "But there must be a reason surely for this extraordinary conduct of Rachel's part. She is keeping a sinful secret from you and from everybody. May there not be something in these recent events which threatens her secret with discovery?" "Discovery?" repeated my aunt. "What can you possibly mean? Discovery through Mr. Luca? Discovery through my nephew?" As the word passed her lips, a special providence occurred. The servant opened the door and announced Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite. End of Part 24. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Read by Kristine Bekere. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 2. Mr. Godfrey followed the announcement of his name, as Mr. Godfrey does everything else, exactly at the right time. He was not so close on the servant's heels as to startle us. He was not so far behind as to cause us the double inconvenience of a pause and an open door. It is in the completeness of his daily life that the true Christian appears. This dear man was very complete. "Go to Miss Verinder," said my aunt, addressing the servant, "and tell her Mr. Ablewhite is here." We both inquired after his health. We both asked him together whether he felt like himself again after his terrible adventure of the past week. With perfect tact he contrived to answer us at the same moment. Lady Verinder had his reply in words, I had his charming smile. "What," he cried with infinite tenderness, "have I done to deserve all this sympathy?" "My dear aunt, my dear Miss Clack, I have merely been mistaken for somebody else. I have only been blindfolded, I have only been strangled, I have only been thrown flat on my back on a very thin carpet covering a particularly hard floor. Just think how much worse it might have been. I might have been murdered, I might have been robbed. What have I lost? Nothing but nervous force, which the law doesn't recognize as property, so that, strictly speaking, I have lost nothing at all. If I could have had my own way, I would have kept my adventure to myself. I shrink from all this fuss and publicity. But Mr. Luca made his injuries public, and my injuries, as the necessary consequence, have been proclaimed in their turn. I have become the property of the newspapers, until the gentle reader gets sick of the subject. I am very sick indeed of it myself. May the gentle reader soon be like me. And how is dear Rachel? Still enjoying the gaieties of London? So glad to hear it. Miss Clack, I need all your indulgence. I am sadly behindhand with my committee work and my dear ladies. But I really do hope to look in at the mother's small clothes next week. Did you make cheering progress at Monday's committee? Was the board hopeful about future prospects? And are we nicely off for trousers? The heavenly gentleness of his smile made his apologies irresistible. The richness of his deep voice added its own indescribable charm to the interesting business question which he had just addressed to me. In truth, we were almost too nicely off for trousers. We were quite overwhelmed by them. I was just about to say so when the door opened again, and an element of worldly disturbance entered the room in the person of Miss Verinder. She approached dear Mr. Godfrey at a most unladylike rate of speed, with her hair shockingly untidy and her face, what I should call, unbecomingly flushed. "I am charmed to see you, Godfrey," she said, addressing him, I grieve to add, in the off-hand manner of one young man talking to another. "I wish you had brought Mr. Luca with you. You and he, as long as our present excitement lasts, are the two most interesting men in all London. It's morbid to say this, it's unhealthy, it's all that a well-regulated mind like Miss Clack's most instinctively shudders at. Never mind that. Tell me the whole of the Northumberland Street story directly. I know the newspapers have let some of it out." Even dear Mr. Godfrey partakes of the fallen nature which we all inherit from Adam. It is a very small share of our human legacy, but alas, he has it. I confess it grieved me to see him take Rachel's hand in both of his own hands, and lay it softly on the left side of his waistcoat. It was a direct encouragement to her reckless way of talking, and her insolent reference to me. "Dearest Rachel," he said in the same voice which had thrilled me when he spoke of our prospects and our trousers, "the newspapers have told you everything, and they have told it much better than I can." "Godfrey thinks we all make too much of the matter," my aunt remarked. "He has just been saying that he doesn't care to speak of it." "Why?" She put the question with a sudden flush in her eyes, and a sudden look up into Mr. Godfrey's face. On his side he looked down at her with an indulgence so injudicious and so ill-deserved that I really felt called on to interfere. "Rachel, darling," I remonstrated gently, "true greatness and true courage are ever modest." "You are a very good fellow in your way, Godfrey," she said, not taking the smallest notice, observe, of me, and still speaking to her cousin as if she was one young man addressing another. "But I am quite sure you are not great. I don't believe you possess any extraordinary courage, and I am firmly persuaded, if you ever had any modesty, that your lady worshippers relieved you of that virtue a good many years since. You have some private reason for not talking of your adventure in Northumberland Street, and I mean to know it." "My reason is the simplest imaginable, and the most easily acknowledged," he answered, still bearing with her. "I am tired of the subject." "You are tired of the subject? My dear Godfrey, I am going to make a remark." "What is it?" "You live a great deal too much in the society of women, and you have contracted two very bad habits in consequence. You have learned to talk nonsense seriously, and you have got into a way of telling fibs for the pleasure of telling them. You can't go straight with your lady worshippers. I mean to make you go straight with me. Come and sit down. I am brimful of downright questions, and I expect you to be brimful of downright answers." She actually dragged him across the room to a chair by the window, where the light would fall in his face. I deeply feel being obliged to report such language and to describe such conduct. But hemmed in as I am between Mr. Franklin Blake's check on one side and my own sacred regard for truth on the other, what am I to do? I looked at my aunt. She sat unmoved, apparently in no way disposed to interfere. I had never noticed this kind of torpor in her before. It was perhaps the reaction after the trying time she had had in the country. Not a pleasant symptom to remark, be it what it might, at dear Lady Verander's age, and with dear Lady Verander's autumnal exuberance of figure. In the meantime Rachel had settled herself at the window with our amiable and forbearing, our too forbearing Mr. Godfrey. She began the string of questions with which she had threatened him, taking no more notice of her mother or of myself than if we had not been in the room. "Have the police done anything, Godfrey?" "Nothing whatever." "It is certain, I suppose, that the three men who laid the trap for you were the same three men who afterwards laid the trap for Mr. Luca?" "Humanly speaking, my dear Rachel, there can be no doubt of it." "And not a trace of them has been discovered?" "Not a trace." "It is so, is it not, that these three men are the three Indians who came to our house in the country?" "Some people think so." "Do you think so?" "My dear Rachel, they blindfolded me before I could see their faces. I know nothing whatever of the matter. How can I offer an opinion on it?" Even the angelic gentleness of Mr. Godfrey was, you see, beginning to give way at last under the persecution inflicted on him. Whether unbridled curiosity or ungovernable dread dictated Miss Verander's questions I do not presume to inquire. I only report that, on Mr. Godfrey's attempting to rise, after giving her the answer just described, she actually took him by the two shoulders and pushed him back into his chair. Oh, don't say this was immodest. Don't even hint that the recklessness of guilty terror could alone account for such conduct as I have described. We must not judge others. My Christian friends, indeed, we must not judge others." She went on with her questions unabashed. Earnest biblical students will perhaps be reminded, as I was reminded, of the blinded children of the devil, who went on with their orgies unabashed in the time before the flood. "I want to know something about Mr. Luca, Godfrey." "I am again unfortunate, Rachel. No man knows less of Mr. Luca than I do." "You never saw him before you and he met accidentally at the bank?" "Never." "You have seen him since?" "Yes. We have been examined together, as well as separately to assist the police." "Mr. Luca was robbed of a receipt which he had got from his bankers, was he not? What was the receipt for?" "For a valuable gem which he had placed in the safe keeping of the bank." "That's what the newspapers say. It may be enough for the general reader, but it is not enough for me. The banker's receipt must have mentioned what the gem was." "The banker's receipt, Rachel, as I have heard it described, mentioned nothing of the kind. A valuable gem, belonging to Mr. Luca, deposited by Mr. Luca, sealed with Mr. Luca's seal, and only to be given up on Mr. Luca's personal application. That was the form, and that is all I know about it." She waited a moment after he had said that. She looked at her mother and sighed. She looked back again at Mr. Godfrey and went on. "Some of our private affairs at home," she said, "seem to have got into the newspapers." "I grieve to say it is so." "And some idle people, perfect strangers to us, are trying to trace a connection between what happened at our house in Yorkshire and what has happened since, here in London. The public curiosity in certain quarters is, I fear, taking that turn. The people who say that the three unknown men who ill-used you and Mr. Luca are the three Indians also say that the valuable gem—" There she stopped. She had become gradually, within the last few moments, whiter and whiter in her face. The extraordinary blackness of her hair made this paleness, by contrast, so ghastly to look at, that we all thought she would faint, at the moment when she checked herself in the middle of her question. Dear Mr. Godfrey made a second attempt to leave his chair. My aunt entreated her to say no more. I followed my aunt with a modest medicinal peace offering in the shape of a bottle of salts. We none of us produced the slightest effect on her. "Godfrey, stay where you are. Mamma, there is not the least reason to be alarmed about me. Cluck, you're dying to hear the end of it. I won't faint expressly to oblige you." Those were the exact words she used, taken down in my diary the moment I got home. But oh, don't let us judge, my Christian friends, don't let us judge. She turned once more to Mr. Godfrey. With an obstinacy dreadful to see, she went back again to her place, where she had checked herself, and completed her question in these words. "I spoke to you a minute since about what people were saying in certain quarters. Tell me plainly, Godfrey, do they any of them say that Mr. Luca's valuable gem is the Moonstone?" As the name of the Indian diamond passed her lips, I saw a change come over my admirable friend. His complexion deepened. He lost the genial suavity of manner which is one of his greatest charms. A noble indignation inspired his reply. "They do say it," he answered. "There are people who don't hesitate to accuse Mr. Luca of telling a falsehood to serve some private interests of his own. He has over and over again solemnly declared that, until this scandal assailed him, he had never even heard of the Moonstone. And these vile people reply, without a shadow of proof to justify them, he has his reasons for concealment. We decline to believe him on his oath. Shameful, shameful!" Rachel looked at him very strangely, I can't well describe how, while he was speaking. When he had done, she said, "Considering that Mr. Luca is only a chance acquaintance of yours, you take up his cause, Godfrey, rather warmly." My gifted friend made her one of the most truly evangelical answers I ever heard in my life. "I hope, Rachel, I take up the cause of all oppressed people rather warmly," he said. The tone in which those words were spoken might have melted a stone, but, oh dear, what is the hardness of stone? Nothing compared to the hardness of the unregenerate human heart. She sneered. I blush to record it. She sneered at him to his face. "Keep your noble sentiments for your ladies' committees, Godfrey. I am certain that the scandal which has assailed Mr. Luca has not spared you." Even my aunt's torpor was roused by those words. "My dear Rachel," she remonstrated, "you have really no right to say that." "I mean no harm, mamma. I mean good. Have a moment's patience with me, and you will see." She looked back at Mr. Godfrey with what appeared to be a sudden pity for him. She went the length, the very unladylike length, of taking him by the hand. "I am certain," she said, "that I have found out the true reason of your unwillingness to speak of this matter before my mother and before me. An unlucky accident has associated you in people's minds with Mr. Luca. You have told me what scandal says of him. What does scandal say of you?" Even at the 11th hour, dear Mr. Godfrey, always ready to return good for evil, tried to spare her. "Don't ask me," he said. "It's better forgotten, Rachel. It is indeed." "I will hear it," she cried out fiercely at the top of her voice. "Tell her, Godfrey," entreated my aunt. "Nothing can do her such harm as your silence is doing now." Mr. Godfrey's fine eyes filled with tears. He cast one last appealing look at her, and then he spoke the fatal words. "If you will have it, Rachel, scandal says that the Moonstone is in pledge to Mr. Luca, and that I am the man who has pawned it." She started to her feet with a scream. She looked backwards and forwards from Mr. Godfrey to my aunt, and from my aunt to Mr. Godfrey, in such a frantic manner that I really thought she had gone mad. "Don't speak to me! Don't touch me!" she exclaimed, shrinking back from all of us, I declare like some hunted animal, into a corner of the room. "This is my fault. I must set it right. I have sacrificed myself. I had a right to do that if I liked, but to let an innocent man be ruined, to keep a secret which destroys his character for life. Oh, good God! It's too horrible. I can't bear it." My aunt half rose from her chair, then suddenly sat down again. She called to me faintly, and pointed to a little phial in her workbox. "Quick!" she whispered. "6 drops in water. Don't let Rachel see." Under other circumstances I should have thought this strange. There was no time now to think, there was only time to give the medicine. Dear Mr. Godfrey unconsciously assisted me in concealing what I was about from Rachel, by speaking composing words to her at the other end of the room. "Indeed, indeed, you exaggerate," I heard him say. "My reputation stands too high to be destroyed by a miserable passing scandal like this. It will be all forgotten in another week. Let us never speak of it again." She was perfectly inaccessible, even to such generosity as this. She went on from bad to worse. "I must and will stop it," she said. "Mamma, hear what I say. Miss Clack, hear what I say. I know the hand that took the Moonstone. I know." She laid a strong emphasis on the words. She stamped her foot in the rage that possessed her. "I know that Godfrey Applewhite is innocent. Take me to the magistrate, Godfrey. Take me to the magistrate, and I will swear it." My aunt caught me by the hand and whispered, "Stand between us for a minute or two. Don't let Rachel see me." I noticed a blush tinge in her face which alarmed me. She thought I was startled. "The drops will put me right in a minute or two," she said, and so closed her eyes and waited a little. While this was going on, I heard dear Mr. Godfrey still gently remonstrating. "You must not appear publicly in such a thing as this," he said. "Your reputation, dearest Rachel, is something too pure and too sacred to be trifled with." "My reputation!" she burst out laughing. "Why, I am accused, Godfrey, as well as you. The best detective officer in England declares that I have stolen my own diamond. Ask him what he thinks, and he will tell you that I have pledged the Moonstone to pay my private debts." She stopped, ran across the room, and fell on her knees at her mother's feet. Oh, mamma, mamma, mamma! I must be mad, mustn't I, not to own the truth now?" She was too vehement to notice her mother's condition. She was on her feet again and back with Mr. Godfrey in an instant. "I won't let you, I won't let any innocent man be accused and disgraced through my fault. If you won't take me before the magistrate, draw out a declaration of your innocence on paper, and I will sign it. Do as I tell you, Godfrey, or I will write it to the newspapers. I'll go out and cry it in the streets." We will not say this was the language of remorse. We will say it was the language of hysterics. Indulgent Mr. Godfrey pacified her by taking a sheet of paper and drawing out the declaration. She signed it in a feverish hurry. "Show it everywhere. Don't think of me," she said, as she gave it to him. "I'm afraid, Godfrey, I have not done you justice hitherto in my thoughts. You are more unselfish, you are a better man than I believed you to be. Come here when you can, and I will try to repair the wrong I have done you." She gave him her hand. Alas for our fallen nature! Alas for Mr. Godfrey! He not only forgot himself so far as to kiss her hand, he adopted a gentleness of tone in answering her, which, in such a case, was little better than a compromise with sin. "I will come, dearest," he said, "on condition that we don't speak of this hateful subject again." Never had I seen and heard our Christian hero to less advantage than on this occasion. Before another word could be said by anybody, a thundering knock at the street door startled us all. I looked through the window and saw the world, the flesh, and the devil waiting before the house, as typified in a carriage and horses, a powdered footman, and three of the most audaciously dressed women I ever beheld in my life. Rachel started and composed herself. She crossed the room to her mother. "They have come to take me to the flower show," she said. "One word, mamma, before I go. I have not distressed you, have I?" Is the bluntness of moral feeling, which could ask such a question as that after what had just happened, to be pitied or condemned? I like to lean towards mercy. Let us pity it. The drops had produced their effect. My poor aunt's complexion was like itself again. "No, no, my dear," she said. "Go with our friends and enjoy yourself." Her daughter stopped and kissed her. I had left the window and was near the door when Rachel approached it to go out. Another change had come over her. She was in tears. I looked with interest at the momentary softening of that obdurate heart. I felt inclined to say a few earnest words. Alas, my well-meant sympathy only gave offence. "What do you mean by pitying me?" she asked in a bitter whisper as she passed to the door. "Don't you see how happy I am? I am going to the flower show, Clark, and I've got the prettiest bonnet in London." She completed the hollow mockery of that address by blowing me a kiss, and so left the room. I wish I could describe in words the compassion I felt for this miserable and misguided girl, but I am almost as poorly provided with words as with money. Permit me to say, my heart bled for her. Returning to my aunt's chair, I observed dear Mr. Godfrey searching for something softly here and there in different parts of the room. Before I could offer to assist him he had found what he wanted. He came back to my aunt and me with his declaration of innocence in one hand and with a box of matches in the other. "Dear aunt, a little conspiracy," he said. "Dear Miss Clack, a pious fraud which even your high moral rectitude will excuse. Will you leave Rachel to suppose that I accept the generous self-sacrifice which has signed this paper? And will you kindly bear witness that I destroy it in your presence before I leave the house?" He kindled a match and lighting the paper led it to burn in a plate on the table. "Any trifling inconvenience that I must suffer is a nothing," he remarked, "compared with the importance of preserving that pure name from the contaminating contact of the world. There, we have reduced it to a little harmless heap of ashes, and our dear impulsive Rachel will never know what we have done. How do you feel? My precious friends, how do you feel? For my poor part, I am as light-hearted as a boy." He beamed on us with his beautiful smile. He held out a hand to my aunt and a hand to me. I was too deeply affected by his noble conduct to speak. I closed my eyes. I put his hand in a kind of spiritual self forgetfulness to my lips. He murmured a soft remonstrance. Oh, the ecstasy, the pure, unearthly ecstasy of that moment! I sat, I hardly know on what, quite lost in my own exalted feelings. When I opened my eyes again, it was like descending from heaven to earth. There was nobody but my aunt in the room. He had gone. I should like to stop here. I should like to close my narrative with a record of Mr. Godfrey's noble conduct. Unhappily there is more, much more, which the unrelenting pecuniary pressure of Mr. Blake's cheque obliges me to tell. The painful disclosures which were to reveal themselves in my presence during that Tuesday's visit to Montagu Square were not at an end yet. Finding myself alone with Lady Verinder, I turned naturally to the subject of her health, touching delicately on the strange anxiety which she had shown to conceal her indisposition, and the remedy applied to it, from the observation of her daughter. My aunt's reply greatly surprised me. "Drusilla," she said. If I have not already mentioned that my Christian name is Drusilla, permit me to mention it now. You are touching quite innocently, I know, on a very distressing subject. I rose immediately. Delicacy left me but one alternative, the alternative, after first making my apologies, of taking my leave. Lady Verinder stopped me and insisted on my sitting down again. "You have surprised a secret," she said, "which I had confided to my sister Mrs. Applewhite and to my lawyer Mr. Bruff, and to no one else. I can trust in their discretion, and I am sure, when I tell you the circumstances, I can trust in yours. Have you any pressing engagement, Drusilla, or is your time your own this afternoon?" It is needless to say that my time was entirely at my aunt's disposal. "Keep me company, then," she said, "for another hour. I have something to tell you which I believe you will be sorry to hear. And I shall have a service to ask of you afterwards, if you don't object to assist me." It is again needless to say that, so far from objecting, I was all eagerness to assist her. "You can wait here," she went on, "till Mr. Bruff comes at 5, and you can be one of the witnesses, Drusilla, when I sign my will." Her will! I thought of the drops which I had seen in her workbox. I thought of the bluish tinge which I had noticed in her complexion. A light which was not of this world, a light shining prophetically from an unmade grave, dawned on my mind. My aunt's secret was a secret no longer. End of Part 25. The Moonstone, by Wilkie Collins. Read by Kristine Bekere. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 3. Consideration for poor Lady Verinder forbade me even to hint that I had guessed the melancholy truth before she opened her lips. I waited her pleasure in silence, and, having privately arranged to say a few sustaining words at the first convenient opportunity, felt prepared for any duty that could claim me, no matter how painful it might be. "I have been seriously ill, Drusilla, for some time past," my aunt began, "and, strange to say, without knowing it myself. I thought of the thousands and thousands of perishing human creatures who were all at that moment spiritually ill, without knowing it themselves, and I greatly feared that my poor aunt might be one of the number." "Yes, dear," I said sadly, "yes." "I brought Rachel to London, as you know, for a medical advice," she went on. "I thought it right to consult 2 doctors." 2 doctors! And, oh me, in Rachel's state, not one clergyman. "Yes, dear," I said once more, "yes." "One of the 2 medical men," proceeded my aunt, "was a stranger to me. The other had been an old friend of my husband's, and had always felt a sincere interest in me for my husband's sake. After prescribing for Rachel, he said he wished to speak to me privately in another room. I expected, of course, to receive some special directions for the management of my daughter's health. To my surprise, he took me gravely by the hand and said: "I have been looking at you, Lady Verinder, with a professional as well as a personal interest. You are, I am afraid, far more urgently in need of medical advice than your daughter." He put some questions to me which I was at first inclined to treat lightly enough, until I observed that my answers distressed him. It ended in his making an appointment to come and see me, accompanied by a medical friend, on the next day, at an hour when Rachel would not be at home. The result of that visit, most kindly and gently conveyed to me, satisfied both the physicians that there had been precious time lost which could never be regained, and that my case had now passed beyond the reach of their art. For more than 2 years I have been suffering under an insidious form of heart disease, which, without any symptoms to alarm me, has by little and little fatally broken me down. I may live for some months, or I may die before another day has passed over my head. The doctors cannot, and dare not, speak more positively than this. It would be vain to say, my dear, that I have not had some miserable moments since my real situation has been made known to me. But I am more resigned than I was, and I am doing my best to set my worldly affairs in order. My one great anxiety is that Rachel should be kept in ignorance of the truth. If she knew it, she would at once attribute my broken health to anxiety about the diamond, and would reproach herself bitterly, poor child, for what is in no sense her fault. Both the doctors agree that the mischief began 2, if not 3 years since. I am sure you will keep my secret, Drusilla, for I am sure I see sincere sorrow and sympathy for me in your face." Sorrow and sympathy! Oh, what pagan emotions to expect from a Christian Englishwoman anchored firmly on her faith! Little did my poor aunt imagine what a gush of devout thankfulness thrilled through me as she approached the close of her melancholy story. Here was a career of usefulness opened before me. Here was a beloved relative and perishing fellow creature on the eve of the great change, utterly unprepared, and led, providentially led, to reveal her situation to me. How can I describe the joy with which I now remembered that the precious clerical friends on whom I could rely were to be counted, not by ones or twos, but by tens and twenties? I took my aunt in my arms. My overflowing tenderness was not to be satisfied, now, without anything less than an embrace. "Oh," I said to her fervently, "the indescribable interest with which you inspire me! Oh, the good I mean to do you, dear, before we part!" After another word or two of earnest prefatory warning, I gave her her choice of 3 precious friends, all plying the work of mercy from morning to night in her own neighborhood, all equally inexhaustible in exhortation, all affectionately ready to exercise their gifts at a word from me. Alas! the result was far from encouraging. Poor Lady Verinder looked puzzled and frightened, and met everything I could say to her with the purely worldly objection that she was not strong enough to face strangers. I yielded, for the moment only, of course. My large experience, as reader and visitor, under not less, first and last, than 14 beloved clerical friends, informed me that this was another case for preparation by books. I possessed a little library of works, all suitable to the present emergency, all calculated to arouse, convince, prepare, enlighten, and fortify my aunt. "You will read, dear, won't you?" I said in my most winning way. "You will read if I bring you my own precious books, turned down at all the right places, aunt, and marked in pencil where you are to stop and ask yourself, does it apply to me?" Even that simple appeal, so absolutely heathening in the influence of the world, appeared to startle my aunt. She said, "I will do what I can, Drusilla, to please you," with a look of surprise, which was at once instructive and terrible to see. Not a moment was to be lost. The clock on the mantelpiece informed me that I had just time to hurry home, to provide myself with a first series of selected readings, say a dozen only, and to return in time to meet the lawyer, and witness Lady Verander's will. Promising faithfully to be back by 5 o'clock, I left the house on my errand of mercy. When no interests but my own are involved, I am humbly content to get from place to place by the omnibus. Permit me to give an idea of my devotion to my aunt's interests by recording that, on this occasion, I committed the prodigality of taking a cab. I drove home, selected and marked my first series of readings, and drove back to Montagu Square, with a dozen works in a carpet-bag, the like of which, I firmly believe, are not to be found in the literature of any other country of Europe. I paid the cabman exactly his fare. He received it with an oath, upon which I instantly gave him a tract. If I had presented a pistol at his head, this abandoned wretch could hardly have exhibited greater consternation. He jumped up on his box, and, with profane exclamations of dismay, drove off furiously. Quite useless, I am happy to say. I sowed the good seed, in spite of him, by throwing a second tract in at the window of the cab. The servant who answered the door, not the person with the cap ribbons to my great relief, but the footman, informed me that the doctor had called and was still shut up with Lady Verinder. Mr. Brough, the lawyer, had arrived a minute since, and was waiting in the library. I was shown into the library to wait too. Mr. Brough looked surprised to see me. He is the family solicitor, and we had met more than once on previous occasions under Lady Verinder's roof. A man, I grieve to say, grown old and grizzled in the service of the world, a man who, in his hours of business, was the chosen prophet of love and mammon, and who, in his hours of leisure, was equally capable of reading a novel and of tearing up a tract. "Have you come to stay here, Miss Clark?" he asked, with a look at my carpet bag. To reveal the contents of my precious bag to such a person as this would have been simply to invite an outburst of profanity. I lowered myself to his own level, and mentioned my business in the house. "My aunt has informed me that she is about to sign her will," I answered. "She has been so good as to ask me to be one of the witnesses." "Aye, aye. Well, Miss Clark, you will do. You are over 21, and you have not the slightest pecuniary interest in Lady Verinder's will." Not the slightest pecuniary interest in Lady Verinder's will. Oh, how thankful I felt when I heard that! If my aunt, possessed of thousands, had remembered poor me, to whom £5 is an object; if my name had appeared in the will, with a little comforting legacy attached to it, my enemies might have daubed it, the motive which had loaded me with the choicest treasures of my library, and had drawn upon my failing resources for the prodigal expenses of a cab. Not the cruellest scoffer of them all could doubt now. Much better as it was. Oh, surely, surely, much better as it was. I was aroused from these consoling reflections by the voice of Mr. Brough. My meditative silence appeared to weigh upon the spirits of this worldling, and to force him, as it were, into talking to me against his own will. "Well, Miss Clack, what's the last news in the charitable circles? How is your friend Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite, after the mauling he got from the rags in Northumberland Street? Egad, they're telling a pretty story about that charitable gentleman at my club." I had passed over the manner in which this person had remarked that I was more than 21, and that I had no pecuniary interest in my aunt's will, but the tone in which he alluded to dear Mr. Godfrey was too much for my forbearance. Feeling bound, after what had passed in my presence that afternoon, to assert the innocence of my admirable friend whenever I found it called in question, I own to having also felt bound to include in the accomplishment of this righteous purpose a stinging castigation in the case of Mr. Brough. "I live very much out of the world," I said, "and I don't possess the advantage, sir, of belonging to a club, but I happen to know the story to which you allude, and I also know that a viler falsehood than that story never was told." "Yes, yes, Miss Clark, you believe in your friend. Natural enough. Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite won't find the world in general quite so easy to convince as a committee of charitable ladies. Appearances are dead against him. He was in the house when the diamond was lost, and he was the first person in the house to go to London afterwards. Those are ugly circumstances, madam, viewed from the light of later events. I ought, I know, to have set him right before he went any farther. I ought to have told him that he was speaking in ignorance of a testimony to Mr. Godfrey's innocence, offered by the only person who was undeniably competent to speak from a positive knowledge of the subject. Alas! The temptation to lead the lawyer artfully on to his own discomfiture was too much for me. I asked what he meant by later events, with an appearance of the utmost innocence. "By later events, Miss Clark, I mean events in which the Indians are concerned," proceeded Mr. Bruff, getting more and more superior to poor me, the longer he went on. "What do the Indians do the moment they are let out of the prison at Frizinghall? They go straight to London and fix on Mr. Luker. What follows? Mr. Luker feels alarm for the safety of a valuable of great price, which he has got in the house. He lodges it privately, under a general description, in his banker's strong room. Wonderfully clever of him, but the Indians are just as clever on their side. They have their suspicions that the valuable of great price is being shifted from one place to another, and they hit on a singularly bold and complete way of clearing those suspicions up. Whom do they seize and search? Not Mr. Luker only, which would be intelligible enough, but Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite as well. Why? Mr. Ablewhite's explanation is that they acted on blind suspicion after seeing him accidentally speaking to Mr. Luker. Absurd! Half a dozen other people spoke to Mr. Luker that morning. Why were they not followed home too, and decoyed into the trap? No, no, the plain inference is that Mr. Ablewhite had his private interest in the valuable, as well as Mr. Luker, and that the Indians were so uncertain as to which of the two had the disposal of it, that there was no alternative but to search them both. Public opinion says that, Miss Clark, and public opinion on this occasion is not easily refuted." He said those last words looking so wonderfully wise in his own worldly conceit that I really, to my shame be it spoken, could not resist leading him a little further still, before I overwhelmed him with the truth. "I don't presume to argue with a clever lawyer like you," I said, "but it is quite fair, sir, to Mr. Ablewhite to pass over the opinion of the famous London police officer who investigated this case. Not the shadow of a suspicion rested upon anybody but Miss Verinder in the mind of Sergeant Cuff." "Do you mean to tell me, Miss Clark, that you agree with the sergeant?" "I judge nobody, sir, and I offer no opinion." "And I commit both those enormities, madam. I judge the sergeant to have been utterly wrong, and I offer the opinion that, if he had known Rachel's character as I know it, he would have suspected everybody in the house but her. I admit that she has her faults. She is secret and self-willed, odd and wild, and unlike other girls of her age, but true as steel and high-minded and generous to a fault. If the plainest evidence in the world pointed one way, and if nothing but Rachel's word of honor pointed to the other, I would take her word before the evidence, lawyer as I am. Strong language, Miss Clark, but I mean it." "Would you object to illustrate your meaning, Mr. Bruff, so that I may be sure I understand it? Suppose you found Miss Verinder quite unaccountably interested in what has happened to Mr. Ablewhite and Mr. Luker. Suppose she asked the strangest questions about this dreadful scandal, and displayed the most ungovernable agitation when she found out the turn it was taking." "Suppose anything you please, Miss Clark. It wouldn't shake my belief in Rachel Verinder by a hair's breadth." "She is so absolutely to be relied on as that?" "So absolutely to be relied on as that." "Then permit me to inform you, Mr. Bruff, that Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite was in this house not 2 hours since, and that his entire innocence of all concern in the disappearance of the Moonstone was proclaimed by Miss Verinder herself, in the strongest language I ever heard used by a young lady in my life. I enjoyed the triumph, the unholy triumph, I fear I must admit, of seeing Mr. Bruff utterly confounded and overthrown by a few plain words from me. He started to his feet and stared at me in silence. I kept my seat, undisturbed, and related the whole scene as it had occurred. "And what do you say about Mr. Applewhite now?" I asked, with the utmost possible gentleness as soon as I had done. "If Rachel has testified to his innocence, Miss Cluck, I don't scruple to say that I believe in his innocence as firmly as you do. I have been misled by appearances, like the rest of the world, and I will make the best atonement I can by publicly contradicting the scandal which has assailed your friend wherever I meet with it. In the meantime, allow me to congratulate you on the masterly manner in which you have opened the full fire of your batteries on me at the moment when I least expected it. You would have done great things in my profession, madam, if you had happened to be a man." With those words he turned away from me and began walking irritably up and down the room. I could see plainly that the new light I had thrown on the subject had greatly surprised and disturbed him. Certain expressions dropped from his lips as he became more and more absorbed in his own thoughts, which suggested to my mind the abominable view that he had hitherto taken of the mystery of the lost Moonstone. He had not scrupled to suspect dear Mr. Godfrey of the infamy of stealing the diamond, and to attribute Rachel's conduct to a generous resolution to conceal the crime. On Miss Verander's own authority, a perfectly unaccessible authority, as you are aware, in the estimation of Mr. Bruff, that explanation of the circumstances was now shown to be utterly wrong. The perplexity into which I had plunged this high legal authority was so overwhelming that he was quite unable to conceal it from notice. "What a case!" I heard him say to himself, stopping at the window in his walk and drumming on the glass with his fingers. "It not only defies explanation, it's even beyond conjecture." There was nothing in these words which made any reply at all needful on my part, and yet I answered them. It seems hardly credible that I should not have been able to let Mr. Bruff alone even now. It seems almost beyond mere mortal perversity that I should have discovered, in what he had just said, a new opportunity of making myself personally disagreeable to him. But my friends, nothing is beyond mortal perversity, and anything is credible when our fallen natures get the better of us. "Pardon me for intruding on your reflections," I said to the unsuspecting Mr. Bruff, "but surely there is a conjecture to make which has not occurred to us yet." "Maybe, Miss Cluck. I own I don't know what it is." "Before I was so fortunate, sir, as to convince you of Mr. Applewhite's innocence, you mentioned in a case of the reasons for suspecting him, that he was in the house at the time when the diamond was lost. Permit me to remind you that Mr. Franklin Blake was also in the house at the time when the diamond was lost." The old worldling left the window, took a chair exactly opposite to mine, and looked at me steadily, with a hard and vicious smile. "You are not so good a lawyer, Miss Cluck," he remarked, in a meditative manner, "as I supposed. You don't know how to let well alone." "I am afraid I failed to follow you, Mr. Bruff," I said modestly. "It won't do, Miss Cluck. It really won't do a second time. Franklin Blake is a prime favorite of mine, as you are well aware. But that doesn't matter. I'll adopt your view, on this occasion, before you have time to turn round on me. You're quite right, madam. I have suspected Mr. Applewhite on grounds which abstractly justify suspecting Mr. Blake too. Very good, let's suspect them together. It's quite in his character, we will say, to be capable of stealing the Moonstone. The only question is whether it was his interest to do so." "Mr. Franklin Blake's debts," I remarked, "are matters of family notoriety." "And Mr. Godfrey Applewhite's debts have not arrived at that stage of development yet. Quite true. But there happen to be two difficulties in the way of your theory, Miss Cluck. I manage Franklin Blake's affairs, and I beg to inform you that the vast majority of his creditors, knowing his father to be a rich man, are quite content to charge interest on their debts, and to wait for their money. There is the first difficulty, which is tough enough. You will find the second tougher still. I have it on the authority of Lady Verinder herself that her daughter was ready to marry Franklin Blake. Therefore that infernal Indian diamond disappeared from the house. She had drawn him on and put him off again, with the coquetry of a young girl. but she had confessed to her mother that she loved Cousin Franklin, and her mother had trusted Cousin Franklin with the secret. So there he was, Miss Clack, with his creditors content to wait, and with a certain prospect before him of marrying an heiress. By all means consider him a scoundrel, but tell me, if you please, why he should steal the Moonstone? The human heart is unsearchable, I said gently. Who is to fathom it? In other words, madam, though he hadn't the shadow of a reason for taking the diamond, he might have taken it nevertheless through natural depravity. Very well. Say he did. Why the devil— I beg your pardon, Mr. Bruff. If I hear the devil referred to in that manner, I must leave the room. I beg your pardon, Miss Clack. I'll be more careful in my choice of language for the future. All I meant to ask was this: why, even supposing he did take the diamond, should Franklin Blake make himself the most prominent person in the house in trying to recover it? You may tell me he cunningly did that to divert suspicion from himself. I answer that he had no need to divert suspicion, because nobody suspected him. He first steals the Moonstone, without the slightest reason, through natural depravity, and he then acts a part in relation to the loss of the jewel, which there is not the slightest necessity to act, and which leads to his mortally offending the young lady who would otherwise have married him. That is the monstrous proposition which you are driven to assert, if you attempt to associate the disappearance of the Moonstone with Franklin Blake. No, no, Miss Clack, after what has passed here today, between us two the deadlock, in this case, is complete. Rachel's own innocence is, as her mother knows, and as I know, beyond a doubt. Mr. Abelwhite's innocence is equally certain, or Rachel would have never testified to it. And Franklin Blake's innocence, as you have just seen, unanswerably asserts itself. On the one hand, we are morally certain of all these things, and on the other hand, we are equally sure that somebody has brought the Moonstone to London, and that Mr. Luca or his banker is in private possession of it at this moment. What is the use of my experience? What is the use of any person's experience in such a case as that? It baffles me, it baffles you, it baffles everybody. No, not everybody. It had not baffled Sergeant Cuff. I was about to mention this with all possible mildness, and with every necessary protest against being supposed to cast a slur upon Rachel, when the servant came in to say that the doctor had gone, and that my aunt was waiting to receive us. This stopped the discussion. Mr. Bruff collected his papers, looking a little exhausted by the demands which our conversation had made on him. I took up my bag full of precious publications, feeling as if I could have gone on talking for hours. We proceeded in silence to Lady Verinder's room. Permit me to add here, before my narrative advances to other events, that I have not described what passed between the lawyer and me, without having a definite object in view. I am ordered to include in my contribution to the shocking story of the Moonstone a plain disclosure, not only of the turn which suspicion took, but even of the names of the persons on whom suspicion rested, at the time when the Indian diamond was believed to be in London. A report of my conversation in the library with Mr. Bruff appeared to me to be exactly what was wanted to answer this purpose, while, at the same time, it possessed the great moral advantage of rendering a sacrifice of sinful self-esteem essentially necessary on my part. I have been obliged to acknowledge that my fallen nature got the better of me. In making that humiliating confession, I get the better of my fallen nature. The moral balance is restored. The spiritual atmosphere feels clear once more. Dear friends, we may go on again. End of part 26. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Read by Kristine. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 4. The signing of the will was a much shorter matter than I had anticipated. It was hurried over, to my thinking, in indecent haste. Samuel, the footman, was sent for to act as second witness, and the pen was put at once into my aunt's hand. I felt strongly urged to say a few appropriate words on this solemn occasion, but Mr. Bruff's manner convinced me that it was wisest to check the impulse while he was in the room. In less than 2 minutes it was all over, and Samuel, unbenefited by what I might have said, had gone downstairs again. Mr. Bruff folded up the will and then looked my way, apparently wondering whether I did or did not mean to leave him alone with my aunt. I had my mission of mercy to fulfill, and my bag of precious publications ready on my lap. He might as well have expected to move St. Paul's Cathedral by looking at it as to move me. There was one merit about him, due no doubt to his worldly training, which I have no wish to deny. He was quick at setting things. I appeared to produce almost the same impression on him which I had produced on the cabman. He, too, uttered a profane expression, and withdrew in a violent hurry, and left me mistress of the field. As soon as we were alone, my aunt reclined on the sofa, and then alluded, with some appearance of confusion, to the subject of her will. "I hope you won't think yourself neglected, Drusilla," she said. "I mean to give you your little legacy, my dear, with my own hand." Here was a golden opportunity. I seized it on the spot. In other words, I instantly opened my bag and took out the top publication. It proved to be an early edition, only the 25th, of the famous anonymous work, believed to be by precious Miss Bellows, entitled "The Serpent at Home." The design of the book, with which the worldly reader may not be acquainted, is to show how the Evil One lies in wait for us in all the most apparently innocent actions of our daily lives. The chapters best adapted to female perusal are "Satin in the Hairbrush," "Satin behind the Looking Glass," "Satin under the Tea Table," "Satin out of the Window," and many others. Give your attention, my dear aunt, to this precious book, and you will give me all I ask. With those words I handed it to her open, at a marked passage, one continuous burst of burning eloquence. Subject: Satin among the sofa cushions. Poor Lady Verinder, reclining thoughtlessly on her own sofa cushions, glanced at the book and handed it back to me looking more confused than ever. "I am afraid, Drusilla," she said, "I must wait till I am a little better before I can read that. The doctor—" The moment she mentioned the doctor's name I knew what was coming. Over and over again in my past experience among my perishing fellow creatures, the members of the notoriously infidel profession of medicine had stepped between me and my mission of mercy, on the miserable pretence that the patient wanted quiet, and that the disturbing influence of all others, which they most dreaded, was the influence of Miss Cluck and her books. Precisely the same blinded materialism, working treacherously behind my back, now sought to rob me of the only right of property that my poverty could claim, my right of spiritual property in my perishing aunt. "The doctor tells me," my poor misguided relative went on, "that I am not so well to-day. He forbids me to see any strangers, and he orders me, if I read at all, only to read the lightest and most amusing books. Do nothing, Lady Verinder, to weary your head, or to quicken your pulse." Those were his last words, Drusilla, when he left me to-day. There was no help for it but to yield again, for the moment only, as before. Any open assertion of the infinitely superior importance of such a ministry as mine, compared with the ministry of the medical man, would only have provoked the doctor to practice on the human weakness of his patient, and to threaten to throw up the case. Happily there are more ways than one of sowing the good seed, and few persons are better versed in those ways than myself. "You might feel stronger, dear, in an hour or two," I said, "or you might wake to-morrow morning with a sense of something wanting, and even this unpretending volume might be able to supply it. You will let me leave the book, aunt? The doctor can hardly object to that." I slipped it under the sofa cushions, half in and half out, close by her handkerchief and her smelling bottle. Every time her hand searched for either of these, it would touch the book, and, sooner or later, who knows, the book might touch her. After making this arrangement, I thought it wise to withdraw. "Let me leave you to repose, dear aunt. I will call again to-morrow." I looked accidentally towards the window as I said that. It was full of flowers in boxes and pots. Lady Verinder was extravagantly fond of these perishable treasures, and had a habit of rising every now and then, and going to look at them and smell them. A new idea flashed across my mind. "Oh, may I take a flower?" I said, and got to the window unsuspected, in that way. Instead of taking away a flower, I added one, in the shape of another book from my bag, which I left to surprise my aunt among the geraniums and roses. The happy thought followed, why not do the same for her, poor dear, in every other room that she enters? I immediately said good bye, and crossing the hall, slipped into the library. Samuel, coming up, let me out, and supposing I had gone, went downstairs again. On the library table I noticed two of the amusing books which the infidel doctor had recommended. I instantly covered them from sight with two of my own precious publications. In the breakfast room I found my aunt's favorite canary singing in his cage. She was always in the habit of feeding the bird herself. Some groundsel was strewed on a table which stood immediately under the cage. I put a book among the groundsel. In the drawing room I found more cheering opportunities of emptying my bag. My aunt's favorite musical pieces were on the piano. I slipped in two more books among the music. I disposed of another in the back drawing room, under some unfinished embroidery which I knew to be of Lady Verinder's working. A third little room opened out of the back drawing room, from which it was shut off by curtains instead of a door. My aunt's plain, old-fashioned fan was on the chimney-piece. I opened my ninth book at a very special passage, and put the fan in as a marker, to keep the place. The question then came whether I should go higher still, and try the bedroom floor, at the risk, undoubtedly, of being insulted if the person with the cap ribbons happened to be in the upper regions of the house, and to find me put. But, oh, what of that? It is a poor Christian that is afraid of being insulted. I went upstairs prepared to bear anything. All was silent and solitary. It was the servants' tea time, I suppose. My aunt's room was in front. The miniature of my late dear uncle, Sir John, hung on the wall opposite the bed. It seemed to smile at me. It seemed to say, "Drusilla, deposit a book." There were tables on either side of my aunt's bed. She was a bad sleeper, and wanted, or thought she wanted, many things at night. I put a book near the matches on one side, and a book under the box of chocolate drops on the other. Whether she wanted a light, or whether she wanted a drop, there was a precious publication to meet her eye, or to meet her hand, and to say with silent eloquence, in either case, "Come, try me, try me." But one book was now left at the bottom of my bag, and but one apartment was still unexplored, the bathroom, which opened out of the bedroom. And I peeped in, and the holy inner voice that never deceives whispered to me, "You have met her, Drusilla, everywhere else. Meet her at the bath, and the work is done." I observed a dressing gown thrown across a chair. It had a pocket in it, and in that pocket I put my last book. Can words express my exquisite sense of duty done, when I had slipped out of the house, unsuspected by any of them, and when I found myself in the street with my empty bag under my arm? Oh, my worldly friends, pursuing the phantom, pleasure through the guilty mazes of dissipation, how easy it is to be happy, if you will only be good! When I folded up my things that night, when I reflected on the true riches which I had scattered with such a lavish hand from top to bottom of the house of my wealthy aunt, I declare I felt as free from all anxiety as if I had been a child again. I was so light-hearted that I sang a verse of the evening hymn. I was so light-hearted that I fell asleep before I could sing another. Quite like a child again, quite like a child again. So I passed that blissful night. On rising the next morning, how young I felt! I might add, how young I looked, if I were capable of dwelling on the corners of my own perishable body. But I am not capable, and I add nothing. Towards luncheon time, not for the sake of the creature comforts, but for the certainty of finding dear aunt, I put on my bonnet to go to Montagu Square. Just as I was ready, the maid at the lodgings in which I then lived looked in at the door and said, "Lady Verinder's servant to see Miss Cluck." I occupied the parlour floor at that period of my residence in London. The front parlour was my sitting room, very small, very low in the ceiling, very poorly furnished, but, oh, so neat! I looked into the passage to see which of Lady Verinder's servants had asked for me. It was the young footman, Samuel, a civil, fresh-coloured person, with a teachable look and a very obliging manner. I had always felt a spiritual interest in Samuel, and I wished to try him with a few serious words. On this occasion I invited him into my sitting room. He came in with a large parcel under his arm. When he put the parcel down it appeared to frighten him. "My lady's love, miss, and I was to say that you would find a letter inside." Having given that message, the fresh-coloured young footman surprised me by looking as if he would have liked to run away. I detained him to make a few kind inquiries. Could I see my aunt if I called in Montagu Square? No, she had gone out for a drive. Miss Rachel had gone with her, and Mr. Applewhite had taken a seat in the carriage too. Knowing how sadly dear Mr. Godfrey's charitable work was in arrear, I thought it odd that he should be going out driving like an idle man. I stopped Samuel at the door and made a few more kind inquiries. Miss Rachel was going to a ball that night, and Mr. Applewhite had arranged to come to coffee and go with her. There was a morning concert advertised for tomorrow, and Samuel was ordered to take places for a large party, including a place for Mr. Applewhite. "All the tickets may be gone, miss," said this innocent youth, "if I don't run and get them at once." He ran as he said the words, and I found myself alone again, with some anxious thoughts to occupy me. We had a special meeting of the Mothers' Small Clothes Conversion Society that night, summoned expressly with a view to obtaining Mr. Godfrey's advice and assistance. Instead of sustaining our sisterhood under an overwhelming flow of trousers which quite prostrated our little community, he had arranged to take coffee in Montagu Square and to go to a ball afterwards. The afternoon of the next day had been selected for the festival of the British Ladies' Servants' Sunday Sweethearts Supervision Society. Instead of being present, the life and soul of that struggling institution, he had engaged to make one of a party of worldlings at a morning concert. I asked myself what did it mean? Alas! It meant that our Christian hero was to reveal himself to me in a new character, and to become associated in my mind with one of the most awful backslidings of modern times. To return, however, to the history of the passing day. On finding myself alone in my room, I naturally turned my attention to the parcel which appeared to have so strangely intimidated the fresh-coloured young footman. Had my aunt sent me my promised legacy, and had it taken the form of cast-off clothes, or worn-out silver spoons, or unfashionable jewellery, or anything of that sort? Prepared to accept all and to resent nothing, I opened the parcel, and what met my view? The 12 precious publications which I had scattered through the house on the previous day, all returned to me by the doctor's orders. Well might the youthful Samuel shrink when he brought this parcel into my room, well might he run when he had performed his miserable errand. As to my aunt's letter, it simply amounted, poor soul, to this, that she dare not disobey her medical man. What was to be done now? With my training and my principles I never had a moment's doubt. Once self-supported by conscience, once embarked on a career of manifest usefulness, the true Christian never yields. Neither public nor private influences produce the slightest effect on us when we have once got our mission. Taxation may be the consequence of mission, riots may be the consequence of mission, wars may be the consequence of a mission. We go on with our work, irrespective of every human consideration which moves the world outside us. We are above reason, we are beyond ridicule. We see with nobody's eyes, we hear with nobody's ears, we feel with nobody's hearts but our own. Glorious, glorious privilege! And how is it earned? Ah, my friends, you may spare yourselves the useless inquiry. We are the only people who can earn it, for we are the only people who are always right. In the case of my misguided aunt, the form which pious perseverance was next to take revealed itself to me plainly enough. Preparation by clerical friends had failed, owing to Lady Vernder's own reluctance. Preparation by books had failed, owing to the doctor's infidel obstinacy. So be it. What was the next thing to try? The next thing to try was preparation by little notes. In other words, the books themselves having been sent back, select extracts from the books copied by different hands, and all addressed as letters to my aunt, were some to be sent by post, and some to be distributed about the house on the plan I had adopted the previous day. As letters they would excite no suspicion, as letters they would be opened and, once opened, might be read. Some of them I wrote myself. "Dear Aunt, may I ask your attention to a few lines," etc. "Dear Aunt, I was reading last night and I chanced on the following passage," etc. Other letters were written for me by my valued fellow workers, the sisterhood at the Mother's Small Clothes. "Dear Madam, pardon the interest taken in you by a true so humble friend." "Dear Madam, may a serious person surprise you by saying a few cheering words?" Using these and other similar forms of courteous appeal, we introduced all my precious passages, under a form which not even the doctor's watchful materialism could suspect. Before the shades of evening had closed around us, I had a dozen awakening letters for my aunt, instead of a dozen awakening books. 6 I made immediate arrangements for sending through the post, and 6 I kept in my pocket for personal distribution in the house the next day. Soon after 2 o'clock I was again on the field of pious conflict, addressing more kind inquiries to Samuel at Lady Vernder's door. My aunt had had a bad night. She was again in the room in which I had witnessed her will, resting on the sofa, and trying to get a little sleep. I said I would wait in the library on the chance of seeing her. In the fervour of my zeal to distribute the letters, it never occurred to me to inquire about Rachel. The house was quiet, and it was past the hour at which the musical performance began. I took it for granted that she and her party of pleasure seekers, Mr. Godfrey, alas, included, were all at the concert, and eagerly devoted myself to my good work, while time and opportunity were still at my own disposal. My aunt's correspondence of the morning, including the 6 awakening letters which I had posted overnight, was lying unopened on the library table. She had evidently not felt herself equal to dealing with a large mass of letters, and she might be daunted by the number of them if she entered the library later in the day. I put one of my second set of the 6 letters on the chimney-piece by itself, leaving it to attract her curiosity, by means of its solitary position apart from the rest. A second letter I put purposely on the floor in the breakfast room. The first servant who went in after me would conclude that my aunt had dropped it, and would be specially careful to restore it to her. The field thus sown on the basement story I ran lightly upstairs to scatter my mercies next over the drawing-room floor. Just as I entered the front room, I heard a double knock at the street door, a soft, fluttering, considerate little knock. Before I could think of slipping back to the library, in which I was supposed to be waiting, the active young footman was in the hall, answering the door. It mattered little, as I thought. In my aunt's state of health, visitors in general were not admitted. To my horror and amazement, the performer of the soft little knock proved to be an exception to general rules. Samuel's voice below me, after apparently asking some questions which I did not hear, said unmistakably, "Upstairs, if you please, sir." The next moment I heard footsteps, a man's footsteps, approaching the drawing-room floor. Who could this favoured male visitor possibly be? Almost as soon as I asked myself the question, the answer occurred to me. Who could it be but the doctor? In the case of any other visitor, I should have allowed myself to be discovered in the drawing-room. There would have been nothing out of the common in my having got tired of the library and having gone upstairs for a change. But my own self-respect stood in the way of my meeting the person who had insulted me by sending me back my books. I slipped into the little third room which I have mentioned as communicating with the back drawing-room, and dropped the curtains which closed the open doorway. If I only waited there for a minute or two, the usual result in such cases would take place. That is to say, the doctor would be conducted to his patient's room. I waited a minute or two, and more than a minute or two. I heard the visitor walking restlessly backwards and forwards. I also heard him talking to himself. I even thought I recognized the voice. Had I made a mistake? Was it not the doctor, but somebody else? Mr. Bruff, for instance? No, an unerring instinct told me it was not Mr. Bruff. Whoever he was still talking to himself. I parted the heavy curtains the least little morsel in the world, and listened. The words I heard were, "I'll do it today," and the voice that spoke them was Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite's. End of Part 27.